I'm delighted to see the hall now full and brimming with anticipation. This is a great time for me to introduce myself again. I'm Priyasha Dikshit. I'm proud to be a member of the NMF family as a professional research associate. I'm even more proud to be a host for this seminal event. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let us move towards a series of hopefully engrossing sessions that have been carefully curated by the NMF team. Before jumping into this intellectually stimulating jamboree, however, I think we would all agree that a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. So therefore, here we go.
Welcome to the opening professional session of the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue 2024, the Indian Navy's annual apex-level conference, reflecting its international outreach at the strategic level. This session will feature expert perspectives focused upon the South and East China Seas, a region which exemplifies not only the enhanced degree of global concern over the manner in which resources are shaping geopolitical behavior, but also the manner in which it is shaping the identification of new resources. As a vast reservoir of marine resources with immense economic value, this region serves as a critical maritime corridor and a lifeline for many nations, including Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, and South Korea, several of which have overlapping claims in these waters. While ASEAN has worked tirelessly to push for a consensually derived rules-based order, maintaining the fragile state of peace in these seas is becoming increasingly untenable as China continues to tighten her grip, treating them not as shared waters, but as her own fiefdom, thus encroaching on the rights and jeopardizing the sovereignty of other nations. With strong bilateral ties to China, Malaysia walks a tightrope between balancing this relationship while safeguarding her territorial claims. Contemporary and assessed future contours of Sino-Malaysian resource geopolitics will explore how Malaysia navigates these delicate dynamics diplomatically and economically. As a nation heavily dependent on open sea lanes for the flow of vital resources, any disruption in these contested waters could choke Singapore's lifelines. Yet, her strategic foresight, leadership in maritime law, and innovative approaches to marine resource management ensure her resilience. Singapore, navigating the currents and eddies of resource geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific, will delve into how Singapore skillfully balances regional tensions while keeping maritime routes open. From illegal fishing to territorial disputes in the Natuna Sea, where Chinese claims overlap with Indonesian waters, Indonesia's maritime security strategy is critical. In Resource Geopolitics as a Current and Future Driver of Indonesia's Maritime Security, we'll explore Indonesia's efforts to strengthen her naval presence, protect her exclusive economic zone, and secure partnerships with other Indo-Pacific nations. Further afield, South Korea relies on these waters for energy and trade, but faces a future where critical routes could fall under the control of a single dominant power. Maritime resource geopolitics in East Asia, opportunities for India and South Korea, will explore the motivations for and directions of Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy and lay out its policy orientations in the area of maritime security, maritime domain awareness, maritime economy, and the maritime environment. But for the Philippines, this threat is immediate and undeniable. With vast territories in the South China Sea, Chinese Coast Guard and militia boats regularly block access to waters recognized as the Philippines' exclusive economic zone by international tribunals. Such confrontations are not just about resources, they are about power. A single spark could ignite a larger conflict, and the threat of military escalation by the aggrieved nations and their allies looms closer with every skirmish. The stakes are immense, and one wrong move could destabilize not just the region, but the entire world. Dive into Philippine imperatives amidst the resource scramble in the Indo-Pacific, and examine the origin, evolution, and development of the Philippines' archipelagic defense doctrine, one that is geared toward defending the country from external threats in her vast maritime domain. Today's speakers will provide nuanced perspectives on these challenges and ask the critical question: is confrontational geopolitics the only way forward, or can cooperation temper these tensions? Can we recognize that our national aspirations are best realized through regional, and ultimately global collaboration. The most important question you need to ask yourself is, can we afford not to?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, wasn't that something? Now, that's right. Now, to begin the day's proceedings, I would like to invite the Director General of the National Maritime Foundation, Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, AVSM and BAR VSM, to offer his welcome remarks.
Admiral Karambir Singh, Chairman of the National Maritime Foundation, Excellencies, serving and veteran flag, general and air officers, honorable members of the Fourth Estate, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As I stand before you in open-armed welcome, your camaraderie, your encouragement and succor are palpable, and they wash over me much as the love and affection of a close-knit family suffuses each of its kith and kin with warmth and familial support. Now, many of you have traveled over long distances to stand in solidarity with the Indian Navy and with the National Maritime Foundation, whose Director General I am privileged to be. I know that several of you have actually and stoically endured considerable discomfort and the many trials and tribulations that attend travel, especially international travel in our day and age, and others have braved the many perils of the National Capital Region's unforgiving traffic, even as you cock a snook at the travails of advancing age. Still others amongst the star-studded galaxy that I see before me, and I include all those wonderful students on top, make some noise. Thank you. And they have all come having braved their own challenges, bearing torches here of hope and the promise of a brighter and better future. And to each one of you, I would like to aver that I recognize you, and I freely acknowledge with humility and gratitude both the wealth and the strength of your camaraderie and your companionship. To each one present here today in this grand Zorawar auditorium within the resplendent Manekshaw Center, as also those who will be joining us over the next 2 days, whether in physical form or online, I bid you welcome. Welcome to IPRD 2024. Welcome to the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue in its 24th edition, in its 2024 edition. My fellow companions, we gather here, of course, in troubled times. The hope of the India, Middle East, Europe corridor that was so bright and vivid just a few short moments ago or months ago is today shrouded in concern and even alarm as missiles fly between Iran and Israel, engulfing countries in the proximity of the Eastern Mediterranean in the searing flames of armed conflict and mutual suspicion. Conflict in Ukraine continues unabated for the third year in running, with significant impacts that are felt far away from the epicenter of this brutal conflict. The South China Sea continues to roil in the throes of resource-driven geopolitical competition, while at the southern entrance of the East China Sea, the Taiwan Strait teeters on the knife edge between war and peace. Will the Indo-Pacific, then, this vast and predominantly maritime region that stretches from the eastern littoral of Africa to the western littoral of the Americas, and from the southern coastline of Asia all the way down to the icebound continent of Antarctica, will it be an arena of prosperity, or will it be one of confrontation and conflict? It is an unimaginably large storehouse of natural resources that hold out the promise of great prosperity. But the question is whether human wisdom is to be counted in adequate measure amongst these resources. Are we wise? We are all in an age where artificial intelligence is growing exponentially every minute of every day. And then, is AI a resource for human beings, or are human beings a resource for AI? And yet, we, you, all of us present here, we form the companionship of hope. And hope, my friends, is never mere, even when it is meager. When all other senses sleep, the eye of hope is the first to awaken and the last to shut. Hope may not be too robust a strategy, I admit, but despair is most certainly a strategy of doom. So let me welcome you then to the great halls of hope, where we will engage in constructive battles of the mind. The Bhagavad Gita, which is perhaps the holiest of Hindu scriptures, describes the mind as a battlefield and offers guidance on how to navigate the labyrinthine world and how to master the mind. This is the battle to which I bid you a fair and full welcome. In this battle space, we will need to sharpen our weapons of wisdom, of sagacity, of profundity of thought, and complexity of insight. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, let me bid you fair and full welcome to this battle space of the collective mind of the Indo-Pacific. In other words, let me welcome you to our home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I'm honored to invite Admiral Karambir Singh, PVSM, AVSM, former Chief of the Naval Staff, and the incumbent Chairman, NMF, to deliver his inaugural address.
Dignitaries, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everybody. And at the outset, I thought I wish to extend a warm welcome to all the distinguished speakers, moderators, and guests, especially our guests from abroad, to this 2024 edition of the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue, which is in its sixth iteration. It also gives me immense joy to see so many students and academicians here. Also gives me great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to the PhD scholars from CAS who are here with us today. And last but not the least, special greetings to Naval Higher Command Course. I'm positive that your presence will enrich this event immensely. Today, I thought I'd take this opportunity to share a few thoughts on the theme of this edition of IPRD, namely resource geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific, a subject that resonates strongly with the times we live in. You know, when we talk of resource geopolitics, let me say that resource geopolitics is nothing new. In the early days, territories were captured to gain access to resources. The quest for resources was the driving force behind many of the key events in world history, such as the European age of exploration and subsequent age of discovery, both of which were precursors to the age of colonization. And these periods spanning the late 15th century to the 18th century saw European powers embark on long voyages across uncharted seas in search of new trade routes, wealth, and dominion over far-flung territories. And at the heart of this expansionist zeal was a fundamental and insatiable drive. That was the acquisition of valuable resources. So, for example, salt and spices were one strategic resources which drove foreign policy, created trade routes, and precipitated conflicts till new technology like refrigeration, etc., came up. So this relentless pursuit led to the expansion of European empires across the globe, reshaping the world in profound and sometimes devastating ways. And whilst colonization brought wealth and power to Europe, it came at a human and environmental cost, setting the stage for centuries of conflict and inequality. Slave trade, for instance, resulted in forced migration and suffering for millions. The environmental impact of colonial resource extraction, including deforestation, soil depletion, and destruction of ecosystems, has had long-lasting consequences. And in the last century, the fossil fuels started fueling economies and became a much sought-after resource. And this led to several conflicts, geopolitical contests, internal strife, as well as underpinned the two Iraq wars. So why am I harking back to history? It's because the legacy of this bygone era, particularly with reference to resources, continues to influence global politics, economics, and environmental issues even today in this modern world. As we confront new resource challenges, particularly in the context of climate change and sustainability, I think the lessons of the European age of exploration and colonization remain very, very relevant. And this is exacerbated with rising population and as humanity reaches the limits of environment exploitation, it is quite clear that there will be heightened competition for resources and increased tension between consuming nations. Today, we already find ourselves in a heated resource race, albeit in different resources and under different circumstances. Geopolitical contestation of resources or for resources is intensifying and is no longer limited to traditional commodities like oil, gas, or fish stock. Instead, new arenas of competition are emerging, driven by the quest for essential minerals such as cobalt, nickel, lithium, or REEs or rare earth elements. And these minerals, as you know, they drive this renewable energy technologies like electric vehicle, batteries, etc. So what I'm getting at is that the balance between resource acquisition, the well-being of people, and most importantly, the health of the planet is a challenge that is becoming more relevant and vexed today than ever before. And let me illustrate this challenge of getting a balance between resource acquisition and health of the planet with just an example. We had for long used fossil fuels as our primary source of energy. And we all know that we need to replace them with an alternative that is far less carbon intensive. And indeed, this reflects the increasing shared belief that we can only have a future for humankind if that future is a carbon neutral one. So as a result, there's been a marked effort to opt for renewable sources of energy. Electrification of the global transport sector, for example, is the mantra that is being chanted in every capital of this interconnected world. And yet, the seductiveness of this mantra ought not to blind us to the concerns that arise in its wake. And there are some questions that I think hard questions that we need to ask. How, for example, will we dispose the used lithium ion or nickel cadmium batteries that such an electrification would entail? Likewise, given the electricity generators that are driven by wind, solar, or ocean energy, they require enormous quantities of difficult to find metals and rare earth elements. So what would be the environmental and ecological costs of increase in strip mining, open pit mining, and seabed mining? Who will control this mining and the minerals that are extracted through these processes? Would we end up with a more sustainable world or a less sustainable one? Also, as we seek to transition from the carbon-intensive economy to a more sustainable economy, the demands for these minerals and consequent contestation will only increase. So all this forces upon us this sobering thought that howsoever noble, attractive, and hopeful a trajectory this might be, it nevertheless simultaneously casts a dark shadow that we must also recognize and be conscious of. But having painted this rather grim picture, there are some trends that are moving along a trajectory of hope. Amongst this is the transition away from the brown economy towards the green and blue one. And this trajectory is defined by the popular belief that we simply cannot have the luxury of maintaining the present model of a brown economy. Let me explain this brown economic model. It is one in which a human economic behavior can be compared to that of a virus. A virus settles upon a host, consumes all the resources of the host, and when the host is dead or has no more resources to offer, the virus moves along and finds a new host. Since we don't have a planet B, and given that by the year 2050, just over 2 decades from today, the global population is likely to cross 9.8 billion people, this is clearly not a model, or the brown economy model is not a model that we can persist with. As opposed to this model of brown economy, a green economic model addresses the imperative that planetary resources must only be harvested or consumed on levels that are sustainable over the longest possible time frame. However, this green economy still falls short in its failure to recognize that the ocean is the front of all life on Earth. And this centrality of the oceans to human survival and human advancement is what the blue economy draws attention to. And as young people have drive this human sustainability agenda with even greater stridency, it has become quite obvious that there is no choice but to move sooner rather than later to the blue economy model. And therefore, the health of the ocean, it is the health of the ocean that demands our most focused attention. And initiatives like the UN SDG Goal 14, which is aimed at conserving and ensuring sustainable use of oceans, seas, and marine resources, are indeed very timely and laudable. But having given you this good news, that's where my optimism ends. Because as we speak, the state of the world's oceans can be summed up in one word: precarious. And I feel that we are fast approaching the point of no return. Another statistics that normally should cheer but causes concern to me is that in 2030, it is said that the revenues from the seas will be greater than those of the land. And why? Because this, to my mind, would take the maritime domain, make the maritime domain the primary theater for resource geopolitics and contestation, if you're going to look at the way we've looked at life in the past. This contest is not without its consequences. The environmental and geopolitical costs of deep sea mining would be immense. Strip mining, as I said earlier, and seabed extraction are already causing concern due to their potential to destroy fragile ecosystems, harm biodiversity, and exacerbate existing geopolitical tensions. And with significant reserves of these minerals located in on or below the seabed in the Indo-Pacific region, Indo-Pacific region is already emerging as a focal point of this resource race. And as demands rise dramatically, it will necessitate development of resource-driven geopolitical strategies. So, as the Indo-Pacific inevitably becomes the stage for this new age resource geopolitics, I think during the IPRD, we need to ask certain questions. First question that we must ask ourselves is, given this vitiated, charged geopolitical climate with sharpening great power rivalry every day, is resource cooperation or collaboration possible at all? You recollect how our External Affairs Minister characterized the present global situation at the UN General Assembly recently. And I quote, he said, "World stands fractious, polarized, and frustrated. Is there room for maneuver?" As we navigate through the second decade of the 21st century, can we afford to have our geopolitics and its constituent subsets of geoeconomics and geostrategy remain wedded to the violent models that characterize the past? Are competitive and confrontational geopolitics the only way forward? Could they be tempered, if not replaced by more cooperative and collaborative ones? And as the opening, the video showed, can we bring ourselves to recognize the fact that our national aspirations are best realized through regional approaches like Sagar, for example, that lead to pan-regional and global ones? If yes, how might this be done? Will we succumb to narrow self-interest and securitize and increasingly weaponize the new resources that could provide us the energy that we need? Or will we pursue enlightened self-interest instead and formulate collaborative geostrategies? And if we do, how must policy be framed to take forward collaborative agenda? I mean, the holistic security agenda, to my mind, must include not only the protection of maritime resources, but also sustainable management of these resources. This means enforcing international norms such as the UNCLOS, while also developing new frameworks to govern the extraction of non-living resources from the seabed and wholeheartedly supporting the initiatives such as BBNJ. Not only supporting, how do we enforce the BBNJ, for example? As Admiral Chauhan mentioned, can technology and AI become tools for cooperation? I read somewhere that digital twinning of the oceans using the space photography or reconnaissance and AI, they can accelerate our understanding as well as help us in initiating remedial measures to ensure better resource management. I think these are some questions that we could expect our bright interlocutors, both here from here and from abroad, to wrestle with and answer. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll conclude by saying that in the Indo-Pacific, sustainable practices, better enforcement against illegal activities, and the restoration of marine ecosystem are crucial to ensuring that future generations have access to resources they need to thrive. And if you don't do this, the consequences will not be limited to the maritime domain, but will definitely spill over to land-based geopolitics, leading to conflict, economic hardships, migration, etc., etc. So I think a collaborative approach to resource geopolitics is the answer to avoid the mistakes of the past and chart a course towards a more sustainable and secure future for the Indo-Pacific. Just as an aside, before I wind up, I came across an interesting study that suggested the following measures to avoid resource conflict. One was promoting conservationist measures, proactively developing alternative products, that is what we call de-risking, moving aggressively to mitigate climate change, and finally helping developing countries build their capacities to adapt. So this is just food for thought. Thank you. With that, I finished. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my singular pleasure to invite Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India and the incumbent Chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University, to enlighten us with his trademark wisdom and globally renowned erudition through a special address that would launch us on our 3-day voyage. Please join me in welcoming the Ambassador.
Chairman, National Maritime Foundation, Director, National Maritime Foundation, former naval chiefs, very senior serving naval chiefs, distinguished members of the audience. I feel honored to have been given this opportunity to say a few things about the subject that this is the subject of today's program, Resource Geopolitics and Security in the Indo-Pacific. When first I was contacted to deliver this talk, I missed the resource part. I just heard geopolitics and security in the Indo-Pacific. And I said to myself that this is indeed my cup of tea. I've been speaking about this for so long, very easy subject. But when I started working on the subject and focused on the resource part, then I understood that this is more complicated. But then I thought, of course, it narrows down the scope of the subject, because in terms of the geopolitical and security challenges in the Indo-Pacific, we are pretty clear what they are. And a lot has been written on them. But it's a very useful subject to focus on today. And many of the challenges that we are facing as humanity in terms of the resource crunch that we're going to face. And this has been brought out by the chairman, National Maritime Foundation, very well. In fact, he's stolen a lot of my thunder by mentioning many things which I intended also to say. Now, we are discussing the Indo-Pacific in the context of resource geopolitics and security. Now, we all know that the Indo-Pacific is home to more than half the world's population, and it accounts for 60% of the global GDP, as well as 2/3 of global economic growth. So the subject, therefore, becomes very, very pertinent in terms of looking at the future. Now, the geographical spread of the Indo-Pacific has always been a little uncertain. What exactly constitutes the Indo-Pacific? For some time, it was not very clear whether the Indo part covered also the Arabian Sea or ended on the west coast of India. And if you talk of the Pacific, then Pacific is very large. It goes right to the western coast of the Americas. But I don't think that we cover this large body of water. So we have in mind what the Indo-Pacific, the manner in which the Indo-Pacific concept has evolved. I would say this is an area which today covers one from the east coast of Africa to the Western Pacific, and not to that part of the Pacific that touches North and South America. And this coincides geopolitically and security-wise with the remit of the Quad, for instance, or the broad framework of the ASEAN-centered approach to a regional architecture in Asia, or for that matter, the European Union's, French and the UK's Indo-Pacific strategy. These strategies do not include the Pacific coast of the Americas and the richness of resources of that geography. This part of the Pacific is covered by APEC, but then India is not a member of APEC. In fact, if we see the origin of the concept of the Indo-Pacific, it is rooted in former Prime Minister Abe's concept of the confluence of the two seas, which evolved into the Indo-Pacific concept with the Quad as its political base. The Quad is undoubtedly a geopolitical concept, but it has a security dimension too, but is underplayed by all the members. Various aspects of Quad cooperation are emphasized, but if you look at what they discuss, they are not resource-oriented, except in the case of illegal and unreported fishing. So, to my mind, the issues involved in the Indo-Pacific area are essentially sovereignty-related, with security as a major driver. And therefore, geopolitics and security in Indo-Pacific is a frequently discussed subject. But resource geopolitics and security in Indo-Pacific is not, which is why today's discussion is very pertinent. And lots of issues that we have to grapple with have already been underlined by the chairman of the National Maritime Security Foundation. Now, the question arises whether the tensions in the Indo-Pacific region are resource-related or primarily geopolitical, with security at the center. It should be recalled that resource geopolitics and security were central to the colonial project, about which Admiral has spoken in detail. The prosperity of the West relied to a large extent on access to the vast resources of the colonized countries. While the colonial phase of history is over, there is still concern about neo-colonialist policies operating in open or disguised form in relations between what may loosely be called North and South, or the developed and the developing world. Globalization has no doubt raised prosperity levels in many non-Western countries, but it has also aggravated inequalities at the global level. The gap between the technology-rich and resource-rich developing countries has not been sufficiently bridged. Critical and emerging technologies will largely remain the reserve of the technologically advanced West. for many of these technologies, the critical minerals required are largely in the non-Western countries. This is where geopolitics and security comes into play. The structures of the international order are so designed that the developing countries with abundant natural resources will largely continue to be victims of geopolitical and security maneuvers of the developed countries. Those possessing natural resources generally lack capital, and they need foreign capital and technology to develop their resources, and this exposes them to the maneuvers that I just referred to. This is true particularly in the case of relations with African countries with abundant natural resources. In the Indo-Pacific region, I have the east coast of Africa in mind. But these divisions between North and South have been blurred with a country like China, for example, becoming the biggest manufacturing power and needing access to natural resources to feed its vast industrial machine, its need for critical raw materials to maintain its dominance in green technologies, for instance, besides access to agricultural resources of other countries in the region to feed its vast population with rising living standards. China's phenomenal rise has changed the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific region and well beyond. China is at the center of geopolitics and security in the Indo-Pacific, which is also resource-oriented in part. It is claiming exclusive military and economic rights over large parts of the South China Sea. China's 9 or 10-dash line, I hope there's not 11, 12, or 13, which would make the South China Sea as Beijing's lake, as Abe said, is to change the balance of military power in the region by extending the reach of China's aircraft and missiles to challenge US military power in the region. China naturally is seeking to strategically control the important shipping lanes. The South China Sea is a vital crossroads for both intra-Asian trade as well as for trade with the rest of the world, including India, as some of the most dynamic economies in the world are in the region, and they trade with all geographies. And this includes China, the biggest exporting country, as well as Japan and South Korea. Over 60% of global maritime trade passes through these waters, amounting to $3.29 trillion, according to a 2016 estimate. It is believed that the South China Sea has fairly abundant oil and natural gas, approximately 11 billion barrels of petroleum and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in proved and probable reserves, according to one estimate which I saw. But these are largely in uncontested areas close to the coasts. Underwater exploration for oil has occurred off the coasts of Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, and of course, China. There is a conflict between China and Vietnam over drilling in contested areas. In the past, China has protested against the ONGC drilling in Vietnamese waters that China claims, but ONGC is still operating in this area. For India too, resource geopolitics in the Western Pacific is important. India plans to increase the investment in Russia's Far East to get access to the rich resources, to its rich resources, be it coal, oil, natural gas, etc. And if as this investment is made, it has to be then transported to India, which therefore makes these channels of sea lanes of communication in the South China Sea very important. And that is why the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea is important to India as well as to others. The projected Vladivostok-Chennai corridor will also pass through these waters. In the context of the opening of the Arctic route, free and unhindered access through these waters becomes strategically of great importance too. As it happens, 55% of India's trade passes through the South China Sea and the Malacca Strait. The South China Sea is rich in marine life. It is a heavily fished area and is the main source of animal protein for this densely populated area. the regional countries want to retain or exercise rights to these fishing stocks. China is claiming sovereignty over the continental shelf of countries like Philippines and Indonesia, for example, contrary to UNCLOS. Apart from all this, mineral deposits in the South China Sea are being exploited, such as titanophorus, magnetite, zircon, monazite, tin gold, and chromite. In the Indian Ocean, resource geopolitics and security is liable to become sharper as China increases its presence there. Seabed mining will be part of global competition for resources. Nodules containing nickel, cobalt, iron, and massive sulfide deposits of manganese, copper, iron, nickel, cobalt, iron, zinc, silver, and gold are present in sizable quantities on the seabed. China is preparing in a big way to mine minerals like copper, nickel, cobalt, and manganese from the seabed. These are critical materials needed in vast quantities to electrify the global economy and cut dependence on fossil fuels. I've seen photographs of a seabed mining platform that China seems to have built. It is quite humongous and pretty frightening to look at in terms of its size. The International Seabed Authority is still figuring out how mining should be regulated because there are serious issues of pollution, and some environmental groups want actually an outright ban. In the Indian Ocean, coastal sediments are important sources of titanium, zirconium, tin, zinc, and copper. Historically, the Indian Ocean has been a playground of geopolitics and security for centuries. Admiral, the chairman of the MNF, mentioned the colonial era very rightly. It began with the exploring the maritime routes to India in search for the resources of this region, which was later extended to Southeast Asia. The western rim of the Indian Ocean is flush with oil and gas resources. Resource-related geopolitics and security has marked this area for several decades. The volatility of this area, because of its hydrocarbon resources, continues. And it was rightly mentioned again by the Admiral that we've had wars in this region because of the strategy of controlling its hydrocarbon resources. The Indian Ocean is rich in natural resources. 40% of the world's offshore oil production takes place in the Indian Ocean basin. The Indian Ocean holds 16.8% of the world's proven oil reserves and 27.9% of proven natural gas resources. Nearly 80% of India's crude oil requirement is imported by sea via the Indian Ocean. Fishing in the Indian Ocean grew by 300% from 1950 to 2018, reaching 6.5 million tons annually. However, unregulated fishing on the high seas in the Indian Ocean is putting seafood supplies at risk. The existing legal framework for fisheries in the Indian Ocean suffers from regulatory gaps. China has expanded its maritime footprint in the Indian Ocean through its fishing fleet. There are suspicions that its fishing fleets are part of its military surveillance and intelligence networks. Indian Ocean economy is accounted for 35.5% of global iron production and 17.8% of world gold production in 2017. The Indian Ocean Rim countries are faced with the common pressing challenges of overexploitation of natural marine resources. Human security challenges are arising from climate change, pressing challenges of overexploitation of natural marine resources. Human security challenges are arising from climate change impact, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and extreme weather events. Climate change-induced phenomena such as extreme weather events and rising ocean temperatures adversely affect the reproductive pattern and quality of aquatic life in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The negative impacts of climate change extend beyond land-based agriculture to include fishing and aquaculture activities, which are significant components of agricultural output of the Indo-Pacific nations. As the population of the Indo-Pacific region increases in the coming decades, its impact on food security and economy from marine resources would become more substantial. In the Indo-Pacific, as elsewhere, the oceans, seas, and coastal areas contribute to food security and poverty eradication. And yet, the oceans are under severe threat by human activities. Smuggling, illegal fishing, and human trafficking are also major concerns. The lack of regional maritime security architecture has prompted major powers to compete for control over these resources and sea lanes. Most of the Indian Ocean countries have formulated their own fisheries regulations. They lack proper standards, guidelines, coherent regional arrangement, and enforcement mechanism owing to limited data and capacity constraints. India has proposed a cooperative framework to handle maritime issues in the Indian Ocean. India's objectives, as outlined by Prime Minister Modi in 2015, under the banner of SAGA, Security and Growth for All in the region, are to seek a climate of trust and transparency, respect for international maritime rules and norms by all countries, sensitivity to each other's interests, peaceful resolution of maritime issues, and increase in maritime cooperation. The focus of the blue economy is important for preserving the oceans as a source of human security. In the Mauritius Declaration on Blue Economy on September 2015, the Indian Ocean Rim Association recognized the need for urgent action towards improved governance structures to preserve the ocean resources for future generations. The blue economy aims at sustainable management of ocean resources in collaborations across borders and sectors through a variety of partnerships. It was already mentioned, Goal 14 of the Sustainable Development Goals, Life Below Water, outlines the imperative need to increase cooperation for conservation and sustainable use of the oceans, seas, and marine resources. The issues that the island states face are particularly important as they are concerned with the non-traditional security threats from climate change, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, piracy, and oil spills as the biggest security threats in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. These issues rarely make it to the top of the list of security countries of security concerns for major powers in the region. The gap between how these two groups of countries conceive of Indo-Pacific security needs to be bridged. And I'll end with a couple of comments on what was said by the chairman about the need for resource collaboration. I don't think that we are anywhere close to that. What has happened to the blowing up of the Nord Stream gas pipeline and the fact that the energy context between Russia and Europe, energy trade, has been ended, despite the fact that Europe is a huge beneficiary of cheap Russian oil and gas, and Russia needs those resources, needs the funds coming from the export of these resources, shows that even when one is facing extremely serious challenges of geopolitics and security, there is not enough will to do something which should be natural and obvious and be beneficial to all concerned. And bringing China into a collaborative mode in terms of resource collaboration, to my mind, is also unlikely in the foreseeable future. And finally, with regard to looking at the future and how we're going to cope with the increasing population and the stress on resources, it is absolutely right that there should be more cognizance of this problem if humanity is to survive. But I don't think that the developed world and the developing world are anywhere close to to facing this challenge together. Our Prime Minister has rightly advocated life. Change your lifestyle to take care of the environment. And this was very much part of what was in the joint statement issued by the G20 summit, which we shared last year. But unless there is this consciousness that the brown economy will lead us to an ultimate disaster. And it will lead us to an ultimate disaster because the consumption of global resources by the developing countries is huge. And unless there's a change in their lifestyle, I don't think we're going to find a solution. So whether I end on a pessimistic note or a less pessimistic note, I leave you to judge. But I think, and I'll end with this, it's very important that we are now focusing on this subject today of the resource geopolitics and security in the Indo-Pacific Ocean because it touches the life of all of us and our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We can all see that your formidable reputation as an intellect par excellence is indeed richly deserved. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am privileged to request Ambassador Kanwal Sibal to honor us by releasing the 2024 edition of Maritime Perspectives entitled Eastern Segment of the Indo-Pacific Maritime Power Play. This is a thematically arranged annual publication of the NMF and provides readers with a ready-to-absorb set of high-quality research articles that have been produced by scholars of the Foundation. This volume has been edited and compiled by Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, DG NMF, and Captain Kamlesh K. Agnihotri, Senior Fellow, NMF. This publication highlights distinct interconnected threads relevant to maritime expansionist agenda being pursued by some revisionist powers within the Indo-Pacific, and the responses thereto. Sir, may I request you to do the honors? Thank you very much, sir. May I now request Admiral Karambir Singh, Chairman NMF, to present a token of our gratitude to the Ambassador. And in the same breath, may I request everyone to please come ahead of the tables for a group photograph immediately following the book release. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Ambassador Kanwal Sibal. Thank you, sir. May I request you to please resume your seat in the audience? Moving into the session proper, it is with an abiding sense of honor that I now invite the moderator, Dr. Viswapati Trivedi, and our 5 eminent speakers, Dr. Sumathy Perumal, Professor Renato Castro, Ms. Jane Chan Kitien, Dr. Shafia Muhibat, and Dr. Chweongi to please come up on the stage. Dr. Trivedi, I request you to take over the proceedings for the remainder of this session.
Morning. It's an honor to be a moderator for the first session of the IPRD 2024. Chairman of NMF, Admiral Karambir Singh, DGM NMF, Admiral Chauhan, Ambassador Sibal, who we heard a great speech, sir. It was very enlightening for, I'm sure, all of us here. As a moderator, I'm supposed not to be speaking too much. I'm supposed to be allowing not others to speak too much, but yet I will, since I have the responsibility to introduce the subject and the galaxy of very highly specialized panel here. I take this opportunity to introduce 5 of our very specialized speakers, and including myself, we are 6 doctorates sitting here, all PhDs. And so you can imagine the amount of focus and specialization that you will be offloaded upon during the session. And I'm really excited about how the whole thing goes out. Each one of the panelists is an expert on the area, not just the subject, but also the geography. We have, the subject is, of course, the Indo-Pacific, as Ambassador Sibal says. It's a very, very large area from the west of Americas to the Indian coast, and depends on whether we include the eastern coast or the western coast. It's a huge area. But today's session, fortunately, is not to discuss all the problems of Indo-Pacific, but we will focus on the problems that we have with respect to resource, geopolitics, and security in the Indo-Pacific, specifically on the South and East China Seas. I will endeavor to introduce some major issues, and the speakers will present a medley of geographical perspectives. We are fortunate to have speakers from all the major stakeholders in the region, and the presentations will, I'm sure, give you a very focused 360-degree view on the subject. So let me, before I proceed ahead with my remarks, give you an introduction to the speakers one by one. We have Dr. Sumathy Perumal. She is head center of the Maritime Security and Diplomacy and Coastal and Marine Environment Maritime Institute of Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. She would be speaking on contemporary and assessed future contours of Sino-Malaysian resource geopolitics. Dr. Perumal. Then we have Professor Renato Cruz de Castro, who is the Distinguished Professor of International Studies Department, De La Salle University in Manila, Philippines. Professor Castro would be speaking on Philippines' imperatives amidst the resource scramble in the Indo-Pacific. One more very interesting subject, and I'm sure he'll throw some very interesting light on it, given his deep research and insight into the subject and the area. Our third speaker would be Ms. Jane Yin Chan. She is the Senior Research Fellow and Coordinator, Maritime Security Program, Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies, S. Rajaratnam Institute of Strategic Studies in Singapore. Ms. Chan would be speaking on Singapore, navigating the currents and eddies of resource geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific. Then we have Dr. Shafia Muhibat. She's the Deputy Executive Director of Research, Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, in Jakarta, Indonesia. Dr. Muhibat would be speaking on resource geopolitics as a current and future driver of Indonesia's maritime security. Then we have Dr. Cho, Director and Head, Center for ASEAN India Studies at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy in Seoul, in Korea. Dr. Cho, I hope I'm taking the pronunciation correctly, would be speaking on maritime resource geopolitics in East Asia, opportunities for India and South Korea. Now that, again, is a very interesting subject, and coming from an expert like Dr. Cho, I'm sure it'll be of huge engrossing value for all of us here, especially a whole lot of people who are academically and doing research into these sessions. Myself, as a keen shipping economist and a maritime person, I believe that maritime economics is highly intertwined with the geopolitical environment. From the time of Mesopotamian code and the Roman Bill of Lading, which I'm sure some of the students are aware of, that there was a Bill of Lading in the Roman times too, economics has been indeed driven by supply and demand. These basics have never changed in the past 5,000 years. Circumstances have changed. However, the truth is that maritime business prospers when Romans provided safe passage, but it broke down when Pax Romana broke down in the 3rd century. Similarly, with the stability provided by the European empires, as has been alluded to by earlier speakers too, the liner and tramp business prospered. Later, following the Second World War, maritime economics prospered because of the Bretton Woods providing a framework. And that's when the International Maritime Organization and such rule-making institutions came into existence. The primary lesson from history is that economics will always be the same and is not so crucial for future analysis. That's my thinking, because it'll always be driven by profit. But an assessment of the geopolitical environment and its direction is the most relevant. That makes these discussions and collaborative efforts very important for economics to prosper. For this reason, our work and deliberations on such an assessment at this conference make it very relevant and very important. We are also aware that SAGAR, which is a collaborative approach with the Indian government, stands for Standing for Security and Growth for All in the region, is a concept that encompasses several large areas of the world. Out of these, there are many spokes to SAGAR. IPRD stands out as a very important platform. Every year, we at NMF extend the debate to area-specific or sector-specific issues, making substantial contributions to furthering the dialogue among the region's stakeholders. The theme of today's deliberations will revolve around resource-driven geopolitical dynamics. As we know, among the significant issues that straight away come to our mind, as also has been flagged by earlier speakers, are energy, which leading to competition for oil and gas resources, notably in the South China Sea, maritime trade, leading to strategic control of choke points, such as the Strait of Malacca and on the other side, the Hormuz. Rare earth minerals, where China's dominance in production sparks concerns. Fisheries, disputing over fishing grounds and resources. Infrastructure, China's Belt and Road Initiative versus India's Look East policy. Well, these are the issues which we would be focusing on. And the major players, China, for example, has been asserting expansion and leveraging its economic and military power. United States has been emphasizing security and trade. India is an emerging regional leader, emphasizes economic growth and security. Japan, Australia, and ASEAN are all crucial actors in the regional dynamics that we're going to be talking about. Well, what are the major challenges and opportunities? Very briefly, because it's all been said and will be talked about more. Territorial disputes, environmental concerns, economic interdependence. Several mechanisms have been developed to address these concerns over the years, for the last several decades, and enhance the regional dialogue, promote economic integration, foster strategic partnerships, and encourage sustainable resource management. As I mentioned earlier, all these efforts aim to create a stable geopolitical environment without which economics and prosperity for all cannot happen. In brief, Indo-Pacific's resource geopolitics are complex and multifaceted, has been mentioned, and you'll see more of it coming. Collaboration, diplomacy, and sustainable practices are essential for regional stability and prosperity. This is the spirit we'll be driving through this session. I would quickly add that UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, provides a legal framework. We already have a legal framework, maybe not very effective, which is vital to governing the use of world's oceans and resources. Its core provisions regarding the territorial sea, exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, high sea, and archipelagic waters define the principles of freedom of navigation, right of innocent passage, protection of maritime environment, preservation of living resources, and peaceful settlement of disputes. As history has shown, there will be persistent pressure on the observance of these principles as population grows and some asymmetric military and economic power grows in these regions. This is what is happening in the South China Sea. Except for the Bretton Woods collaborative mechanism, which also followed large destructions during the Second World War, the redeeming feature of the present mechanism is an early ex-ante collaborative discussions and efforts. That's what we are doing, an ex-ante effort so that it doesn't become to a World War 3, 4, I don't know which one. IPRD is a spoke in a similar attempt to understand each other and work together to prevent any cataclysmic impact on any one state player, big or small, being able to create tensions and conflict. One of the interesting things which I thought I'll mention here, we can follow it up in later discussions at the MMF. One of the key players in the orderly exploitation of underwater minerals is the International Seabed Authority, which Ambassador Sibal had referred to. This authority was established in 1982 by the UN Convention UNCLOS and then 1994 Agreement on Implementation. The ISA, the International Seabed Authority's dual mission is to authorize and control the development of mineral-related operations in the international seabed, which is considered the common heritage of all mankind. The area beyond national jurisdiction. ISA is responsible for safeguarding the international deep sea, defined as waters below 200 meters, 656 feet, where photosynthesis is hampered by inadequate light, governing approximately half of total area of the world's ocean. The ISA oversees activities that might threaten biological diversity and harm the marine environment. NMF has done incredible work in this area of undersea mining. I've seen even a book being published by NMF on this. And I, as secretary in the Ministry of Shipping, had handled this very keenly, and I still work a lot on the International Seabed Authority and the working of the implementation mechanism. In our future deliberations in the IPRD, I suggest, I'll bring this proposal to the DG, that we can also study the possibilities of collaborative efforts supporting seabed mineral exploitation. With these remarks, I invite the speakers today. We look forward to an interesting and a thought-provoking exchange of ideas. And thank you very much for the time. And you'll see more of me as the discussion goes on. So to begin with, may I invite Dr. Sumathy Perumal to deliver her speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trivedi, for the introduction. Before I begin, let me thank the Chairman and the Director General of National Maritime Foundation for having me here once again. I'm very delighted to be here and to speak at this very impressive conference on Indo-Pacific. So the title was given to me to speak on contemporary and assess future contours of Sino-Malaysian resource politics. I believe, as mentioned by the introduction remarks, it is a very fragile and complex title, more so for the countries who are directly involved in the claims in the South China Sea. It is quite clear when you talk about Sino-Malaysia's resource geopolitics, I think the focus is directly looking at the South China Sea. So my presentation, I will not speak for 20 minutes as described in the agenda. I will try to give a very brief presentation between 10 to 15 minutes in three parts. First, I will talk about the maritime resources. Why maritime resources matters important for Malaysia and also China. And secondly, I will talk about Chinese-Malaysia relation, what is at stake, what is important, why the Malaysian government and the Chinese government are giving special attention to the bilateral relation, and how it would shape how we deal with even resource and larger geopolitical issues in the South China Sea. And the third part will be the South China Sea grey zone tactics by China and also its implication in the South China Sea dispute. Now, when you talk about resource politics, the energy sector is a main driver of the growth for the Malaysian economy. So it contributes to 28% for the gross domestic GDP. And it is, you can see that Malaysia is a maritime nation. So Malaysia is surrounded by sea areas, the South China Sea, the Straits of Malacca, the Sulu and the Celebes Sea, and also, you know, on the northern approaches on the Straits of Malacca to the Indian Ocean. So we are surrounded by sea, and there are critical resources that Malaysia have to pay attention to explore, to exploit, and also to preserve and safeguard. So when you talk about maritime resources, it is divided into two. One is the living resource, second is non-living resource. The living resource, we are talking about the fishes, you know, the resource that we can harvest from the sea for other subsidiary businesses that is very important for coastal countries. Like, for example, Malaysian states like Perak, Langkawi, even Kelantan, the East Coast states, they produce a lot of businesses, small businesses for the coastal country from the fishes, fish-based products. So, and it drives the economy, and it's quite important for coastal states. But my focus today will be specifically discussing about the non-living resources, which is the oil and gas. And The oil and gas is quite critical because we have large national petroleum company that play a critical role in Malaysia's economy. And Malaysia has about 4 billion barrels of proven oil and reserve. This is all information available in the public domain, reports and also assessment of energy outlook. It is the second largest Southeast Asian oil producer and the world's second largest exporter of liquefied natural gas after Qatar. In Malaysia, specifically in the coast of in the state of Sarawak, there are port of Bintulu, which has the world's largest single site for LNG production facilities and the world's first gas to liquid conversion to plant. Also in the Sarawak state, the national petroleum company Petronas and the with partner with other private companies like the Royal Dutch Shell are combining to invest about USD 12 billion over 30 years in a production sharing agreement aimed at recovering up to 750 millions of barrels of oil from partly depleted fields in the coast of Sarawak. So you can imagine the vast interest and the resource, the potential that Malaysia has with regards to non-living resources in the South China Sea, and specifically oil and gas projects in the pipeline, such as Kasawari. I think many of you all have seen some incidents involving China and oil exploration companies in Kasawari. There are also other areas like Jerun, Majarom, Lang, Lebah in Sarawak, and also Gungusut, Kakap, Redev, and Belut clusters in Sabah. So what I would like to emphasize here is oil and gas energy resources are very, very critical, and it is most important for Malaysia when you talk about the South China Sea, apart from Malaysia's EEZ, Malaysia's military stations, and also Malaysia's claim itself in the South China Sea. Now, what will happen when you talk about future projection? By 2020, Asia's net oil imports are expected to reach about 37 million barrels a day. So as such, many of the oil companies and also production sharing companies that have been engaging Malaysia have projected there are long-term opportunity for Malaysia to undertake joint technical, commercial and economic feasibility studies for the industry in the future. Hence, you can see exploitation, drilling, surveys are going on, and this is essentially sometimes become an issue when China, that claims the South China Sea, would like to either see what's happening, or sometimes China would like to also observe very closely what form of exploration or what type of activities that Malaysia is undertaking there. So it is important to note that the energy sector, the businesses and the future, the production and the businesses are also relying on geopolitics or following the geopolitics conflict, because it is quite significant that the geopolitics can impact on the businesses. In fact, I've also spoken last year in Petronas, one of our major national oil exploration company, about the risk of energy in the South China Sea and how businesses can be affected from this. And it is evident by the conflicts in Europe, Middle East, and when they put the oil and gas market on edge, and the concern that the supply chain may be disrupted. So Russia and Ukraine war has put the energy on top of the international politics and security concern. Outbreak of conflict has laid bare politics and security implication for excessive energy dependence. If you can see on the second scale of the pyramid, geopolitics can contribute about, like, the index is about 30% impact of the wider geopolitics. So will have an impact on the energy issues. Now, the second part of presentation will focus on Sino-Malaysian relation. China and Malaysia is celebrating 50th anniversary of our bilateral relation in 2024 with China. This is a very famous statement that Malaysia was the first country to acknowledge and to establish bilateral relation with China back in 1974. Malaysia was among the first country in the world to also support the Belt and Road Initiative. It started in 2013. Even prior to BRI, Malaysia and China had jointly launched the Malaysian-China Kuantan Industrial Park in February 2013. So the aim is to enhance the land and maritime connectivity between Malaysia and China through infrastructure built under the initiative like Malacca Gateway, the Kuantan Port expansion, and the ECRL. Not all the projects are very successful, but Malaysia and China's 50th relation is celebrated with high stake in my country, and it is it's across many areas: defense and strategy, comprehensive partnership, people-to-people engagement, social-cultural engagement, education, and so on and so forth. So it is a very significant year for both Malaysia and China. In fact, the King of Malaysia just visited China last week. We had, there was a lot of promising investment from China. Hence, as far as Malaysia is concerned, China is really important for trade, people-to-people engagement, social, cultural, and also many other infrastructure and maritime related development partnership. But the bone of contention that I foresee, this is not, I should have said the caveat earlier before my presentation. I'm speaking on my personal capacity and I do not represent any formal opinion from the Malaysian government or the organization. So there is an issue where the Malaysia-China relation could be affected because of the geopolitics in the South China Sea. Precisely because Chinese 9-dash line claims the entirety of the South China Sea, and it is a problem because the claim overlaps in our area, and hence China is watching, China is following, China is sending Coast Guard and so on and so forth, because China claims it is that area. But like many Southeast Asian countries and the claimant countries, Malaysia do not recognize the Chinese 9-dash line map. The statements are there by the the formal statements are there. China's 2023 standard map was published and it created some form of concern as to how China will impose its law enforcement in its claimed area. And of recent, when China was, there was news in the media that China was sending ships to some very close to our oil exploration in the Sarawak area. The Prime Minister stated very clearly that Malaysia will not halt gas and oil exploration in our EEZ. Malaysia, in its EEZ, meaning Malaysia's EEZ. So Malaysia considered the Spratly Islands are critical for sovereignty, sovereign rights, and also security sensitive area. Because of the sensitivity that China says that it belongs to the area and the geopolitics of, the great power. In fact, they spoke, in India, we are talking a lot about what's going to happen in the South China Sea, whether we are looking at, a more deeper conflict that could not only affect the energy security, but also other security issues and mainly concerning the coastal states. So Malaysia have also stated that Malaysia will continue to uphold its sovereign rights as provided by under international law and UNCLOS. And China's claims to the maritime features in the South China Sea has no basis under international law. This was after the 2016 arbitration. I think Professor Nato will speak in greater detail later on. So my last part of the presentation is international security and what do we think about South China Sea as an international security, regional security, and national security. All three are different in different sets of issues. It differs in terms of historical context, priorities, and perspective. So international security for US, for example, or for European Union, or for Japan, in the South China Sea may be larger, may be different from what our priorities are in the South China Sea because of the context that we are dealing with in China, and also the other claimant states. So international security focuses on contemporary issues common to all, but national security and regional security are more focused or more narrowed into the perspective of what is the highest security threat to the coastal countries when dealing with certain problem. So dealing with sets of shared challenges, and these challenges can be either addressed, mitigated, or managed. So as far as I'm concerned, what Malaysia and also other Southeast Asian countries are doing is mainly trying to mitigate and also manage the South China Sea dispute. So in the post-Cold War period, international security has evolved from merely addressing traditional security in terms of national interest, power, winning or avoiding a war, military projection and so on, but also non-traditional security issues. The chairman mentioned rightfully that non-traditional security issues, climate change and so on, depletion of fisheries are a concern, and a lot of discussion efforts were taking place in dealing with non-traditional security issues also in the South China Sea. So what are the actions? International security are collective actions taken to prevent or reduce the conflict. This action may involve various methods such as military intervention, diplomatic action, international law, convention, regional agreements, treaties, and in the form of even capacity building. So by right, I think Malaysia have been taken advantage or benefited so much from the Indo-Pacific partners mainly on capacity building. Now, very narrow to focus on South China Sea confluence of traditional and non-traditional. This is why the South China Sea complex, I think my colleagues who will speak later on will agree, that it is a unique domain. The state of affairs is about the confluence of domestic and international law as well as the theater for competing powers. So as I mentioned, the three dimensions of security, international, regional and national, but it all linked and overlaps in the South China Sea, which has made the South China Sea a rather complex domain to deal with. So individual national interests, regional security and stabilities and so on, for national great powers, probably maintaining freedom of navigation, rule of law and so on. For coastal states, I think maritime governance is important as much as preserving freedom of law and supporting rule of law. Now, when you talk about grey zone tactics, the grey zone tactics, I will not go into the definition, but what I understand is it is not outright clear military activities that you can say if there is an incident, it will construed as a engagement between two actors, two navies or two militaries. But grey zone tactics, it's a grey area. It happens between law enforcement agencies and some smaller vessels and so on. The three pictures, one is of Sarawak, the second one, Second Thomas Shoal, and also of Sabina. So these are the very common pictures that we see as far as grey zone tactics concerned in the South China Sea. Now, with regards to all the areas that I spoke earlier, Malaysia's primary focus, as I mentioned, managing or mitigating and maintaining a peaceful and stable South China Sea can be, usually been done in three approaches. One is the diplomatic, the second is legal and institutional responses. And the three approaches maybe can be, elaborated further in three A's. The aggressive diplomacy that Malaysia is engaging with with China, ASEAN, and the Indo-Pacific powers, the dialogue that Malaysia engages with. We do not take side with any power, but we engage in aggressive diplomacy. We are also advancing rule of law. The ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific itself specifically mentioned about advancing rule of law in the Indo-Pacific, and also the code of conduct, and the COC also mentioned about advancing rule of law and in the South China Sea as the way forward. and also active engagement through ASEAN. So active engagement meaning that Malaysia will take the chair for ASEAN next year, 2025. As much as we can, we want Malaysia. I think the feeling is that Malaysia wants to take advantage of the existing platforms under ASEAN to make sure the dialogues continues and it is effective, continue and effective in managing or mitigating the conflict in this area. So I'll conclude by saying again that the strategic environment seems to revolve around intense geopolitics. Malaysia practice neutral engagement with regards to great powers relation in dealing with powers, especially in contested area. But there are challenges ahead in balancing national interests and avoiding entanglement. So we are always, sometimes there are questions, Malaysia is too close to China and Malaysia is not, practice quiet diplomacy and so on. But it may not be true. Malaysia is, as I mentioned earlier, there's diplomatic, there's active engagement and also advancing rule of law. These are primarily what Malaysia is doing because of the delicate task in navigating the pressure that as a coastal state and ASEAN chair that Malaysia will have for next year. So, but Malaysia, one challenge definitely is an interesting challenge, and how does Malaysia balance its chairmanship without compromising its sovereignty and sovereign rights in the South China Sea? And certainly Malaysia will cooperate, and Malaysia thinks that the cooperation with Indonesia, Indo-Pacific countries, certainly with also Indonesia, is certainly an advantage in the long term. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. I look forward if you have any question in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Perumal. It was very interesting how Malaysia walked the tightrope, how you love thy neighbor and still maintain your sovereignty. In case of trouble, you resort to the Resident Welfare Association, which is the bigger association, to control events. That was very interesting. And I'm sure it's something of a revelation for a lot of people who do research on South China Sea politics. It brought out very, very clearly how engagement is being managed in Malaysia. Our next speaker is Professor Castro, who comes from Philippines and would be speaking on Philippines' imperatives amidst the resource scramble in Indo-Pacific. Professor Castro.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste. This is my second time to do a presentation in this format. My last year presentation talks about or discusses basically the changes that happened in the current administration after 6 years of appeasing China. During the time of former President Rodrigo Duterte, just like Malaysia, we adopted that sort of court of appeasement. But eventually, of course, after a couple of months, the current administration realized that appeasement would lead you to nowhere. And of course, my discussion right now is the fact that we have basically moved away from a policy of simply appeasement to hard balancing to a development of what we call a grand strategy called the archipelagic defense concept. And of course, once you adopt a grand strategy, you basically think in terms of the possibility of armed confrontation with an expansionist power right inside your maritime backyard. So let me start by talking about the South China Sea. Of course, we have discussed about the significance of the South China Sea as being a source of resources, both, of course, living and non-living. We talk of oil and so forth and so on. But of course, if we go back into history, and this is something that we assert, and it's been asserted by the July 12, 2016 Arbitral Tribunal ruling, the South China Sea has been a sea common to all. Civilizations and cultures in Southeast Asia, coming, of course, from India, from Japan and China, going into other parts of the region, was made possible by the fact that that ocean has been a sea common to all. No single power had dominated the South China Sea, or yet we won't have civilization coming as far from the Mediterranean region, from India, and of course going into East Asia, and of course even to China. But of course, it has been a bone of contention between China and several smaller Southeast Asian countries. Of course, this has not been discussed so much. In March 2010, China declared that the South China Sea as its core interests. During the time of the Obama administration, after Secretary Hillary Clinton then announced that the South China Sea is a vital area of interest for the United States, China came out with the notion that it's a core interest along with Taiwan, Tibet, and the South China Sea. And of course, the implication of the fact that it's a core interest, China would use what is necessary to ensure its expansion into the South China Sea. China's aggressive pursuit of its territorial claim over the South China Sea, of course, increased with the expansion of the People's Liberation Army's Navy. Just early this year, I was in a conference in Singapore, and we have a Chinese wolf warrior diplomat, a senior colonel from the People's Liberation Army, who told us point blank in front of a number of American analysts over there, China now has the largest navy in the world. That's the reality that we'll all have to face. China has about 370 ships, in contrast to about 240 ships of the United States Navy. Of course, there's an issue regarding tonnage, regarding issue of combat experience, issue of the fact that, of course, the United States has allies. But from the Chinese perspective, they have now have the largest navy in the world, and of course, from our perspective, they also have the largest Coast Guard in the world. And of course, something that we have also encountered as far as only about 30 nautical miles from the coast of the westernmost island of the Philippines, the Chinese Maritime Militia, who's been very active. Of course, in the second decade of the 21st century, as a great power with comprehensive capabilities, China has orchestrated an integrated maritime campaign, using, of course, all resources at its disposal. Economic coercion, which we experienced in 2012, naval power. Of course, right now we're expecting the Chinese aircraft carrier Liaoning to pass through the Cebu Strait in Mindanao, basically telling us, don't antagonize us. We're a big brother with, of course, a breath of fire. Then, of course, diplomatic intimidation, telling us every now and then, why are you having those Typhoon missiles in the Philippines? We have to tell them, they're in our territory. It's none of your business. That's why we also have the BrahMos missiles. Then, of course, cyber warfare. And, of course, the goal is, as mentioned earlier, control and expansion of the South China Sea. Consequently, China's application of its integrated maritime campaign in the South China Sea has generated intense. Of course, you have to take into account, it depends on our location. We have a different take from our ASEAN, other ASEAN member states. Also in terms of our long history with China, and also the fact that we have, of course, a treaty alliance with the United States and security partnerships, which accounts for our different approach when it comes to the South China Sea issue. But of course, it's an issue of resources, we just emphasize, and legitimacy of territorial claims over various surface and subsurface maritime terrains. Consequently, the major security conundrum that the Philippines has faced in the 21st century, of course, is Chinese maritime expansion. This is, in a way, is a wake-up call for the Philippines because since we became independent in 1946, our focus has always been internal security. This is a wake-up call. Somebody is knocking on our door, and it's a big dragon. So Chinese excellence, of course, this was recognized by the late President Benigno Aquino III, who again, of course, adopted certain policies, strengthening our alliance with the United States, building up our military capability, and more significantly, something that, of course, an important contribution of the late President Benigno Aquino III is the filing of the claim against China in the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which of course led to the July 12, 2016 arbitral ruling, which basically rendered China's expansive claim as simply having no legal basis and also having no history. We have also proven that China, in its 2,000 years of experience, has never dominated the South China Sea. The Chinese notion of the fact that they have been there historically is a myth. And this has been proven in the arbitral tribunal ruling. Based, of course, on the statement of our president in the Shangri-La Dialogue, our claim is based on the July 12, 2016 arbitral ruling, not on mere imagination. Then, of course, we have, it's now, of course, he might be spending some time in The Hague because of what he did, of course, domestically. But of course, what he did is, of course, appease China, and of course, a realization that appeasing China simply doesn't work. President Duterte managed the West Philippine Sea dispute according to Chinese terms, bilateral negotiations, setting aside the arbitral ruling, which came out about 3 weeks after, of course, he assumed the presidency, preventing third parties from interpreting dispute. And of course, we tried to basically follow the Chinese formula of joint development, setting aside sovereignty claim, and of course, joint development. Nothing happened in those 6 years of joint development. Of course, I'll just breeze to this. Of course, let's go to President Marcos. President Marcos, of course, adopted initially a balanced policy, tried to get some economic goodies from China, but of course, tried to strengthen our alliance with the United States. I emphasize this, that close economic cooperation with China, but one, of course, balanced by Philippine security relations with the United States. Something that, of course, he realized with the Duterte administration. If we drop our alliance with the United States, China would treat us like a piece of meat. Basically, that's what experience. Of course, employing a balanced policy, President Marcos envisioned a division of labor, which Washington, as a close former treaty ally, but of course, trying to engage China. So, Chinese are basically telling us, you're a troublemaker. But, the fact that we tried to maintain a balanced relation is a fact that, of course, President Nishio, of course, required a delicate balancing act, which other ASEAN countries had effectively implemented. But of course, it's totally different in the case of the Philippines, because it required us to walk a fine line between fostering greater security cooperation with the United States by, of course, maintaining China's goodwill. And of course, we have no one to credit but China for causing us to tip the balance. Unfortunately, Chinese uncompromising position in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea complemented President Marcos' goal of pursuing a balanced foreign policy between the United States and China. Of course, you have the series of harassment that began during his term. Incidents made, of course, him realize that you could not simply appease China. And of course, this became very apparent during his conversation with President Xi Jinping in Beijing. China always talks about joint development. President Marcos dared President Xi Jinping, let's have joint development at the Reed Bank. President Xi Jinping did not answer right away. The answer came out in the Global Times saying, we can only have joint development in undisputed territory. This basically defeats the very essence of Deng Xiaoping's notion. We have joint development on disputed territory to basically manage the dispute. Why should we have joint development in undisputed territory? In the end, we might have Chinese having joint development inside Manila Bay. So that's basically a realization. So this, of course, impelled President Marcos to have to develop the armed forces of the Philippines. I'll just breeze through this. Of course, President Marcos' approach in confronting China's maritime expansion in a way is similar to the approach of the late President Benigno Aquino III. But of course, more significantly, the Marcos administration realized we have to come out with a grand strategy. We have to prepare the country for possibilities, not only, of course, in terms of the South China Sea. There's, of course, also a realization that the South China Sea dispute is also linked with a major geostrategic flashpoint in our region, and that is, of course, Taiwan, 2027. So, adopted the 21st century grand strategy based on the comprehensive archaeological defense concept. Adopted this grand strategy requires the transformation of the armed forces of the Philippines from an army-centric armed forces geared for internal conflict to a tri-service, establishing. And of course, the long-term goal is linked with resources. This is where you have, of course, the convergence between geopolitics, geostrategy, and resources. It's very basic. You cannot have access to your resources if you could not protect them. And of course, in the maritime domain, you need basically the maritime capabilities, the Navy, and of course, the Coast Guard. So the goal of this is, of course, projecting the military capabilities, of course, is very limited at this point in time into our exclusive economic zone, enhancing, of course. So let me just breeze through what is the very essence of Chinese maritime expansion. Of course, China's effort is to control 80 to 90% of the South China Sea which constitute an integrated maritime campaign, and of course, providing China with comprehensive capability. So the yin and yang, in a way, represents Chinese approach to statecraft and to strategy. Going back to Sun Tzu, you always have to apply two approaches, the indirect and the direct. What we call strategy would constitute water. You cannot see the form because water does not assume any permanent form. It follows the terrain. So Chinese focus conquest account the need to balance preparation with war and, of course, prevention, building up military structures, which put you in a dilemma. What when you do if you have military structures inside your exclusive economic zone? What do you do when the Chinese would adopt basically acts of war like blockade and, of course, ramming? Will you try to escalate it? It puts you in a dilemma. Of course, in order to avoid war while it's enhancing advantage, I'll just breeze directly to what's basically the elements. I'll have to breeze through this. Elements of the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. Okay, so let me just go directly to this. What are the key points? So President Marcos basically asked the National Security Council to do the projection towards external. Comprehensive guidance, more significantly. So in August 2023, the Department of National Defense announced the adoption of the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. The new defense concept aims to project the country's military attention, resources, and capabilities away from the island. This is, of course, based on an old War Plan Orange when the Philippines was still part of the United States territory that we have to defend the main islands, just in case, of course, the Japanese invaded. And, of course, the Japanese invaded in 1941. So CADC is premised on the assumption that the Philippines as an archipelagic country, the landmass is limited while the population increasing. We need to develop our blue economy. You have to expand. CADC incorporate defense concept that the government since 2012 has adopted. Multilateral domain asymmetric warfare, that we look at the possibility of waging an asymmetric war with a more dominant, more powerful country, development of capabilities for maritime domain awareness, and of course, integrating our defense capabilities with our only treaty ally, the United States, and other security partners like Japan, Australia, and possibly South Korea. Plan to survey exploit resources has been prevented by the Chinese. We are evolving into defense concept. CADC, of course, addresses Philippines' strategic vulnerabilities as an archipelagic state and enhances capability to address through specific long-term plan. Massive arms buildup, alliances, build-up of our maritime businesses like shipbuilding and other businesses that would support the development of a navy. CADC's goal is to develop and project AP's limited capability. In a way, we are developing a strategic depth for an archipelagic country. Awareness to implement, of course, just the key points. So the goal, of course, the long-term goal is guarantee unimpeded peaceful exploration and exploitation of all the natural resources with the country's exclusive economic zone so that ordinary Filipinos, like ordinary Filipino fisher folks, could go to traditional fishing grounds and would not be driven or harassed by the Chinese maritime militia and by the Chinese Coast Guard. Even the Chinese Navy sometimes would deploy a guided missile patrol boat to harass Filipino fisher folks. That's how we've experienced Chinese maritime expansion. This move, of course, are strengthening our diplomatic and strategic posture vis-a-vis China's maritime expansion in the South China Sea. Some are key points. So what are the consequences, of course, of the adoption of this policy? The Philippine adoption of CADC infer a comprehensive, defiant, and long-term grand strategy against Chinese maritime expansion, accepting the fact that this is a threat that present and future generations of Filipino would be facing. CADC offers a positive rather than a negative definition of security. Going back to traditional security study, security is an absence of a threat. CADC offers a positive. A definition says it views national security in terms of ability of a polity or collectivity to generate, invest, and consume and utilize its natural resources. It recognizes that the state can only be generally secure and cannot be coerced if it has, of course, access to its resources. Of course, what basically was the impact here? it basically, in a way, isolates us from other ASEAN countries. These diplomatic measures, of course, most ASEAN countries would adopt engagement, hedging, middle-of-the-road approach. Philippines' approach, of course, is characterized by basically considering China expansion as a clear and present danger. In a way, the Philippines' implementation of a grand strategy set us apart, and China has effectively used this in basically telling the world and ASEAN countries the Philippines is a troublemaker. You know, in the recent ASEAN summit, Foreign Minister Wang Yi basically castigated our foreign secretary for allowing the deployment of the Typhoon missiles in the Philippines. Luckily, they're not raising the BrahMos missiles, courtesy of India. So, Face, of course, we have a move away from this diplomatic strategy, adopted grand strategy of hard balancing, appeasement, limited hard balancing. However, the Philippines has resorted to hard balancing by adopting CAD-C as its grand strategy in the face of China's continuing aggressive and expansionist behavior in South Chinese. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. That was very, very, the CAD-C is indeed. I think that kind of a concept is somewhere operating in South China strategy. China. Thank you so much for your very enlightening presentation. May I invite Ms. Chan? Ms. Chan, I think you've lost some ground to Malaysia on time. You could accommodate us there.
Sure. Thank you, sir, for the introduction. A very good morning, one and all. A quick word of thanks once again to the organizer, especially the National Maritime Foundation, Admiral Karambir Singh and Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan for the very kind invitation and the warm hospitality. Always a privilege to join this gathering of friends and experts to share my thoughts, but more importantly, the discussion. Right, so compliments to NMF as well for the very generous, for your generosity in reserving so many seats to the students. I think every year we get some really good and very tough questions from the student, and I expect no less this year. So I have to admit up front that I panicked a little bit last month because I didn't receive a amplifying note from Admiral Chauhan. That usually serves as a guide on what he wants us to cover during the presentation. But as we started receiving the promo videos, right, the promo videos and the panel introductory videos that you just saw, I think the visual aid and the gripping narrations, right, makes for very compelling storylines on why we are all here today. Put together, indeed, you know, I echo Admiral Karambir saying that it was a very grim picture, right? When you put all the videos together. But it makes for a very good invitation to all of us, because I have to say that, you know, some of the videos I would like to think is intentionally provocative and leading as well, right? But yet, you know, if you look at just how crowded this particular auditorium is, I think, you know, the intentions for the video were fully achieved. For those of you who are a bit shy like me, you know, I think this is the perfect platform for us to listen to the experts and learn along the way. So the infamous Singaporean style of presentation is that you make only 3 points. But all of you know that, you know, I'm not quite at that level. It's beyond my competency. So I will share 3 questions. 3 questions that I had as I was enjoying the videos, more like a reaction to the theme, to the videos, but also because, you know, if I'm just going to speak about Singapore's policy, it's going to make for a very boring and brief presentation. So I want to make use of maybe 15 minutes of the time. So what are some of the 3 questions or 3 reactions that I had when I was watching those videos? Number 1, I question whether the fight over resources is actually a lead independent variable to the conflict at sea in Southeast Asia right now. Second, should the focus of the discussion be on ocean as a resource, or the ocean as a resource to a state, Or should we be focusing specifically on maritime resources per se? And three, I'm actually very, very keen to hear views from the question posted by Admiral Karambir Singh and also the introductory video for this panel, i.e. can cooperation temper tensions? Right. I'm personally very skeptical for now, but my friends will know that I'm easily persuaded. So hopefully I walk out of here a changed person. So now onto the task at hand, right? My first question on resource as an independent variable assessing conflict in this part of the world. Now, so following last year's discussion on last year's IPRD discussion on the geopolitical impact on maritime connectivity, I have to admit that I did struggle. I struggled a little bit trying to see how resource geopolitics is a credible independent variable when assessing the leading sources of conflict and potential conflict in East Asia. So less in the Indian Ocean, more in East Asia in the short and medium term. So in short, my personal view is that even if Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan give up, even if all the claimants give up the oil, the fish, the minerals even, China will still not roll back on their claims today. I know this is an oversimplification of the problem, but that best explains how I view the ongoing debate on the motivation behind China's claims. So last year's IPRD discussion and assessment is still a very compelling one to me. Why? Because number one, we acknowledge the main contention on hand is the competing vision of a global order. Second, there was an assessment on the strategic role of institutions and platforms, big and small. And third, recognizing the vulnerability of maritime infrastructure and access. I think these factors provide, again, a very good framework for us to think about the theme this year. So on the one hand, one might really, again, think that, it was a waste of time for me to pose that hypothetical scenario of, even if all other claimant states give up all the resources, right? But my point is that indeed the typical interpretation of rights over resources is no doubt inextricably linked to the debate over sovereignty and sovereign rights. Today, what are the driving forces for China's action? I think that is where I'm coming from, thinking whether resource in itself is the leading motivation. But again, let's not forget that, behind closed doors, country can put anything and everything on the negotiating table. So that hypothetical scenario, may not be so hypothetical. So again, on this first question, I think what I'm trying to put across is that I think that the maritime features in the disputed area, be it islands, rock, submerged features, etc., holds very different value to the claimants other than just the maritime zones and the correlating resource entitlement it may generate. Therefore, it is difficult to propose or even accommodate and entertain a compromise where national pride, values, and possibly the question of identity is at stake. So that's my first reaction to the theme. So on to the second question. Are we talking about ocean as a resource to states or simply maritime resources per se? Again, knowing Admiral Chauhan, he meant for us to cover both, right? So depending on which perspective a country is preoccupied with, I think the debate and the correlating policy recommendations can be rather different. So I raised again, my hypothetical example of giving up specific maritime resources or all of it, where we might not get the compromise on the maritime and territorial disputes, which is arguably one of the leading causes to instability in the region. Now, those resources aside, let's look at ocean as a major conduit for transportation, right? They separate the land masses, but with and combined with technology, I think, they connect us both physically and digitally. So we saw the really good figures through the very nice videos, right? More than 80% of world traded goods carried by sea, more than 90% of communication, being transported around the world via submarine cables on the seabed. So resources today are not only transported by ship, but also through pipelines, again, through the ocean. I'm quite sure, and I believe that this crowd is very familiar with Professor Jeffrey Till's thesis on the attribute of the sea and the modern debate of sea power. If not, I think, Professor Alessio Patalano will be joining us quite soon, and, he can bring us up to speed. So do reserve your difficult question from Prof. Patalano later. But through that lens, I think even Professor Thiel acknowledges the fish, the oil, the gas, but there's also the broader question of access and control, right? And how to ensure when states contend with each other on access and control, there will still be peace and stability at sea. What are the rules involved, right? So through that lens, let's look at Singapore. Small island states which don't have enough maritime zone, and in those limited water, very, very barren water. So we have no fish, no oil, no gas, no minerals, not enough wind for wind power, and not enough surface for, a credible solar power. Still, Singapore as a small state has a fundamental interest in the peaceful settlement of international disputes, including the South China Sea disputes, in accordance with international law and its sanction processes, right? Rather than on the basis that might is right. As an island state, right, hemmed in by big neighbors, Singapore relies on international law, in particular the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, to preserve freedom of navigation and overflight. And we need to ensure that such laws are interpreted and applied consistently. And as a Southeast Asian state, Singapore has an interest to ensure that the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, remains cohesive and united to allow regional space to engage with great powers effectively. So while Singapore don't have the local standard, so to speak, in the fight over the primary rights to resources, right? As an importing state, as a very important node on the supply chain, transporting and adding value to some of these resources, and as a user state of the general sea lines of communication, I think there's sufficient local standard to claim the status of a concerned stakeholder in the geopolitical conundrum shared with our neighbors. So those of you who have heard me before may recall that in my mind, the most worrying trend, right, when thinking about maritime development in the Indo-Pacific and specifically in Southeast Asia, is the competing vision of the global order. And these include the challenges to rules-based maritime order as we know it to be. I often question out loud, very often very loudly, and worry about whether there is still a consensus, right? Whether there's still consensus that we should place our aspiration for peace, safety, security on international rule of law, which includes everything under the ambit of UNCLOS. I hope at least some of you will agree with me that, such doubts are not unfounded, not least because of the skirmishes in Southeast Asia, but also conflict in further parts of the world. And as I watch, right, some of these conflict unfolds further away, I wonder what are the implications to Southeast Asia and what are the options for small states like Singapore? No doubt the effectiveness of UNCLOS is often up for debate. It was raised by other speakers as well, and its provisions are still, sources of contention between states. We in Southeast Asia are still grappling with some rather long-standing challenges to traditional freedoms of the sea. Some of these arise from state practices that threatens the delicate balance between the jurisdiction and obligation of the coastal states versus the rights and duties of the user states. And again, the rather worrying trend of lax observations of agreed principles of laws, rules, and regulations. So we see nation states forgetting that UNCLOS was a product of a grand bargain, one that was forged through very difficult compromises, which we may not achieve again. And preserving the right of coastal states to explore and exploit maritime resources is one such grand bargain. And the provisions in the maritime zones were drafted in a way to ensure that the major maritime sea lanes remain open to naval vessels on top of the commercial ones, and that the coastal states get the fish, oil, and gas and minerals in the exclusive economic zones. So now moving on to the third question and my interest on cooperation, right? I mentioned earlier on that I was really looking forward to hearing views from all of you on whether cooperation can indeed temper tensions. I half suspect that the question was meant to be rhetorical because on paper, right, no one can argue against the value proposition for the need for cooperation. So most Indo-Pacific countries, share an interest and are committed to the importance of freedom of navigation, the free flow of maritime trade, and access to global commons in the manner consistent with international law. Many understood the importance of an inclusive maritime region founded upon international rules and norms, which is crucial for the Indo-Pacific continued growth and prosperity. However, we also know that countries do view and weigh geopolitical and geostrategic developments in the region rather differently. And this assessment of where the future for cooperation lies and what the risk might be differ rather significantly state to state. I'll venture to suggest that, countries whose outlook is a more competitive one will still insist that the strategic environment right now is a zero-sum game, and that it's currently dominated by great power competition and rivalry. So even as extra-regional power or stakeholder extend their interest to cooperate with Southeast Asia, I suspect that many are still going to be concerned that this could add complexity to ongoing Sino-US rivalry. In that vision of the world, I think we already saw there's going to be very little cooperation, rather high risk of a fractured regional institution and conflict. But judging by the agenda and the number of speakers we have in this particular conference, I think more of us are of the view that the outlook is still a cooperative down the cooperative path, reminding ourselves that the success of our nation depends on the seaborne trade and the globalized system that it leads to, right? Of course, still acknowledging that this system is under threat and it's not just because of great power competition. Measures to deal with these threats offer good vehicle for engaging regional partners to help mitigate the impact of some of these threats. But the question remains whether cooperation on these maritime issues on common interests, in the case of resource management, ocean governance, will lead to a spillover effect to help alleviate the trust deficit in the region that is much talked about and arguably one of the leading causes for increased risk of conflict at sea. Again, not to put a wet blanket on cooperation, but I just thought we somewhat clear-minded about the extent to which cooperative mechanisms, apart from its practical and functional purpose is set up to be, whether or not it can realistically have an added function of tempering tensions. For this, I need to look to my senior Southeast Asian colleagues, right? My ASEAN colleagues, for good example, because in my memory, right, even those labeled as CBMs, confidence building measures, were subjected to suspension or cancellation when tensions were high. So rather than the other way around, right? And for those who study ASEAN more than I do, am I right to say that somehow the ASEAN mechanisms have not quite progressed from CBM to preventive diplomacy? Have we given up on that debate? I think we did some time back, right? But if we are still persuaded of the value proposition of cooperation, there's one issue in my mind that warrants more attention and should be placed higher on the priority list, simply because of the far-reaching implication, and one that's already highlighted in the videos. And this is about the safety and security of critical infrastructure, of undersea infrastructure in regional waters, with specific mention of submarine cables and pipelines. Again, I won't need to persuade this particular crowd in terms of how important submarine cables are, but while most incidences of damages and pipelines were accidental, I think recent incidences at sea near and far suggest that these infrastructure are vulnerable to deliberate and malicious targeting and sabotage. With that, thank you for your patience, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Chan. Press the buzz. Hurrying you up, but then I think that was very well taken. Can I request Ms. Muhubat for making her presentation? She comes from Indonesia and would be talking about resource geopolitics in the area. Ms. Muhubat, we are slightly short of time.
Sure. I'll try my best.
Cooperation is the best.
Okay. A very good morning, almost noon to everyone. So I'll begin with, of course, thanking the organizers, the National Maritime Foundation, for the invitation to come here. And I'm very, very happy to be able to be here today and join this incredible panel of experts. The title given to me is Indonesia's Maritime Security Navigating Resource Geopolitics and Future Challenges. You know, when I was preparing my talking points today, I was brought back to the policy that Indonesia had about 10 years ago. So at the beginning of President Joko Widodo's first term, 10 years ago, exactly 2014, he's stepping down very soon in a few days. I think we can recall that the popular / unpopular blowing up the boats policy at the time, which involves the setting up of a special task force to combat IUU fishing, detaining the illegal foreign fishing vessels encroaching Indonesian territory, and the famous blowing up the illegal vessels after going through trial. So at the time, in 2014, when introducing the policy, the government made an estimate that illegal fishing was costing Indonesia $7.58 billion a year. So the policy started in October 2014, so exactly 10 years ago. And by April 2017, so not even 3 years, the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Affairs issued a statement saying that they have blown up 317 ships. The bulk of them from neighboring countries such as Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. So this policy at the time was serving as a deterrent, but also underscores the critical link, I think, between resource geopolitics and maritime security as well. So at the time, this policy received more praise than criticism. But at the same time, the diplomatic headache proved too much. The policy, yes, indeed, it contributed to reducing IUU fishing activities in Indonesian waters, but at the same time created friction with the neighbors. And that, on top of all, it's our ASEAN neighbors. So domestically, the policy was very popular among the public, fueled with a sense of, nationalistic sentiments. We have to protect our resources, we have to protect our integrity and so on. But at the same time, regionally, it created a lot of diplomatic homework to ensure good relations with the neighbors. So each boat blown up, that's one diplomatic note coming from the Indonesian Foreign Ministry, so to say. So this policy no longer exists. It only lasted about 5 years. In his second term, Joko Widodo replaced the minister in charge of fisheries. So we still do patrol our maritime borders, but the handling of the cases have been altered significantly. But I think this is, I'm starting with this because I think this is a very clear example of how access to resources is a complex issue. Securing resources can mean creating frictions. So the big question now, and this is something that I would like to discuss today, and I think what this session is about, is answering the question, then what is the right strategy? Blowing up boats definitely is not the right strategy. So then what is the right strategy? So I'll begin with discussing the significance of maritime resources to Indonesia. But I think I need not mention about our vast marine resources. I talked about fisheries, but there's also oil, gas, and other seabed minerals, which are all essential to our economy. I talked about IUU fishing, but then again, energy resources are another key driver. Of course, the previous speakers have also talked about that. Indonesia's offshore oil and gas fields are vital for its energy security and economic growth. As global demand for energy resources grows and the potential for hydrocarbon extraction increases, protecting these assets becomes paramount. Then there's also the geopolitical context of, maritime resources to Indonesia. We discussed about, I think Indonesia is the world's largest archipelagic state with one of the largest exclusive economic zones, which, judging by our famous policy of blowing up the boats, it must protect to preserve its sovereign rights over these resources. There's a lot of demand from domestically, criticizing the government every time there's an incident in our EEZ. However, the waters are also among the world's most contested, with overlapping claims involving several countries. So protecting these vast marine resources is, of course, critical to Indonesia's sovereignty and economic well-being. So what's the current geopolitical landscape surrounding Indonesia? Of course, the vast exclusive economic zone means that it overlaps with several other countries' claims, leading to disputes. The most, well, it's not the most popular because we do still have disputes in our borders with a lot of countries, our neighbors. But I think tensions arise particularly in areas like the North Natuna Sea, where there are, rich natural resources, but of course, it also overlaps with China's 9-dash lines. The current geopolitical landscape, I think, is very complex. If I can mention at least just 6 key factors. Of course, first is the South China Sea disputes. Second is the strategic maritime routes. Indonesia's strategic location includes the critical choke points, the Malacca, Sunda, Lombok, and Makassar Straits. The third is, we talked about regional security and cooperation, of course, through ASEAN. And then there's the issue of illegal fishing and maritime security. There's, of course, the economic interest. And last but not least, and I'd like to talk about this a little bit later, is about the environmental concerns. So looking at this, from the title, we talked about future drivers of maritime security. Yes, looking ahead, simply saying, of course, we are going to say that resource geopolitics will continue to be a significant driver of Indonesia's maritime security strategy. But how can we put this into perspective? Allow me to point out several points. First, regarding technological advances, and I think this is something that preoccupies Indonesia quite a lot when talking about the future of our maritime security. As technological advances make deep sea resource extraction more feasible, the competition for marine resources is likely to intensify. And what is Indonesia, we recognize that we are lacking, but we are continuing to prepare, is enhancing some of the issues like maritime domain awareness and investing in capabilities to protect its underwater resources. Second point is that climate change also poses a future challenge that intersects with resource geopolitics. As an archipelagic state, this is a very crucial issue for us. Maybe not in the same manners as our friends in the Pacific Islands, but I think climate change is starting to be considered very significant in terms of being a challenge that intersects with resource geopolitics. We talk about, rising sea levels, changing marine ecosystems, which have so far indeed proven to create a shift in fish populations, affecting Indonesia's fishing industry and potentially increasing tensions with neighboring countries over shared resources. So maybe in the future, it's no longer about blowing up boats, but actually to ensure there's actually fish left in the sea because of the rising sea levels and changing marine ecosystems. My third point is about Indonesia's strategic position along major global shipping routes. I talked about the choke points, Malacca, Lombok, Sunda Straits. They present both opportunities and security challenges. The increase in traffic heightened the risk of piracy, smuggling, and potential blockades, making it imperative for Indonesia to strengthen its naval capabilities and international cooperation to safeguard these vital waterways. So let me just indulge a little bit in talking about the impact of climate change and overexploitation of resources, because we've been talking about that quite a lot. Environmental concerns and climate change in Indonesia waters, and I think the big question is more, how do we strategically adapt to it? And it's not, well, climate change impact so far has been found in at least 3 issues, 3 factors: rising sea temperatures, sea level rise, and I talked about this, and extreme weather events, which all have had significant impacts. So the rising ocean temperature have led to an annual decline of 3.3% of migratory fish populations. And at the same time, there's also overfishing that has led to a stagnation of fish catch in the South China Sea, which have occurred since the 1990s, but it has dramatically increased since then. And then there is also the issue of habitat destruction. biodiversity loss, and mitigate. But at the same time, addressing all these challenges requires a comprehensive approach that includes stronger enforcement of environmental regulations, increased investment in sustainable practices, and active participation from local communities and international partners. So this means that, the big question I asked was, how do we strategically adapt to these changes? And it has not been easy, definitely. Creating our maritime strategies no longer is about, measuring resource geopolitics, protecting our territory, but now it has to take into account our adaptation to all of these changes created by climate change as well. Very briefly, yes, I mentioned about enhancing maritime domain awareness, but maybe I can, in essence of time, let's go directly into, then how do we build a flexible maritime security strategy? I said in the beginning, blowing up boats proved to be not so much of a strategy because it did create some, effects with regards to our good relations with our neighbors. So what is then, a flexible maritime security strategy? And I think the key word here is not only flexible, but also adaptive, because then we not only take into account the issues of the resources of the territorial borders and so on, but also the changes brought about by climate change and other environmental factors. So we here talked about, we are preparing, yes, for diverse threats from piracy to illegal fishing and environmental disasters, and ensuring that maritime strategies are flexible and responsive to changing conditions. And at the same time, regional international cooperation is, of course, also significant. Yes, we are strengthening ties with ASEAN and other regional organizations, but we are also collaborating with global powers to balance regional influence and maintaining stability. So let me just come to my last slide. And I think this is me trying to summarize some of my key points that I mentioned in my slides earlier. First key point is Indonesia's maritime security is shaped by its resources and geopolitical location. So that's something that is given. Second point, coming back to this, adaptive strategy, we also recognize that future challenges include technological competition, climate change, resource competition, and the need for enhanced maritime security measures. Third point, the combination of national resilience and international cooperation is essential for safeguarding Indonesia's maritime interests. And last but not least, Indonesia's proactive stance in maritime security is crucial for its future economic stability and regional leadership. So we will have a new government coming in October. We will, we are yet to see what sort of, maritime security strategy will the new government come up with. Don't be surprised if we see, interesting policies like 10 years ago with the new government bringing in, interesting policies like the blowing up the boats. But let's hope that it doesn't really get to that. And let's hope that, we can really come up with this adaptive strategy that not only taking into account the importance of the resources and protecting our territorial integrity, but also taking into account diplomatic measures, good relations with our neighbors, and also taking into account the changes brought about by climate change and environment. I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Mubat. It was national resilience to maritime geopolitics. That's a very interesting concept. But as an economist, I would like to say that there is, in this unstable geopolitical environment, there is nothing like what we call in economics a Pareto optimal situation, where nobody else can be made better off by making anybody else worse off. So that situation is very difficult to achieve because the goalposts are changing. As you said, the politics is changing, the governments are changing, people are changing. So I don't think we should target for a Pareto optimal situation in any situation. But yes, a dynamic situation to adjust, as you said, very resilient policy would do. One, thank you very much for your expose. And now I invite Dr. Klo from South Korea to make this presentation. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Trivedi. Thank you very much for your audience patience for the last presentation. I'd like to focus on, rather than focusing on technical and functional details, I'd like to make a broad overview of South Korea's overall maritime approach under the new president's Indo-Pacific strategy. I'd like to make talk about four points. The first one is the motivation and strategic thinking that underlies South Korea's this new Indo-Pacific strategy. And second, we have very exciting recent progress of Korean government's policy stance on South China Sea. I'd like to briefly touch upon that. And then I'd like to briefly go over Korean government's priority in maritime domain. And finally, some of the opportunities, potential opportunities for collaboration between Korea and India. I think one of the most important starting point for Korea's overall strategic repositioning and the new maritime approach is from the President Yoon's new initiative, the Indo-Pacific strategy, which was announced December 2022. So, I mean, the key element of this new foreign policy initiative is simple. So we need to play a greater role, not only at the regional level, but the global level. And also, we should take a greater responsibility in regional as well as global level affairs of peace and security and prosperity. Well, so this is the photo of former Korea's foreign minister, Mr. Park, presenting the President Yoon's new Indo-Pacific strategy. Well, before getting into a little bit of the Indo-Pacific strategy, let me briefly address some of the misunderstanding and confusions about South Korean government's strategic direction. I mean, in one way, if you look at compare the previous government's foreign policy stance vis-a-vis North Korea, vis-a-vis China, US, and compare those of the current President Yoon's policy, Korea seems to be kind of swinging between Beijing and Washington, torn apart between these two great powers, right? So sometimes hedging, bandwagoning, things like that. So this kind of impression, based on the misunderstanding or confusion about Korea's strategic orientation, I think there are at least I think there are at least three confusions about Korean government's foreign policy direction, especially under the incumbent President Yoon's policy. The first one is that with this new Indo-Pacific strategy, South Korea took side with the United States against China. So President Yoon and the South Korea now is pro-US, anti-China. So this kind of impression, right? This is not true. This is misunderstanding. The second one is South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy is just a copycat or imitation of US Indo-Pacific strategy. Because South Korea is just an ally of the United States, right? This is not true. The third one is, if you look at the foreign policy maneuvers of the President Yoon for his first 2 years of tenure, he first tried to mend bilateral relationship with Japan, and then he traveled to Washington D.C. to forge the trilateral alliance with the U.S. and Japan, and also he made a lot of effort to strengthen the extended deterrence against the North Korea's nuclear threat. So it looks like that South Korea is not really interested in forging ties with Southeast Asian partners or India for the matter. This is not true. Indo-Pacific strategy is a regional, comprehensive regional strategy with which we aspire to expand our diplomatic, economic horizons. So in this regard, yeah, so this is kind of the three broad misunderstanding about South Korea's overall foreign policy direction. I think one of the main reasons why we came up with this in a belated way, new Indo-Pacific strategy, is the acute sense of crisis of the existing rules-based order. If you look at the trajectory of the South Korean economic miracle, right, we were totally destroyed and devastated by the Korean War, right? But now we are number 10 economy in the world. So we have come a very long way. So what kind of international kind of environment or the situation allowed us to have this kind of economic miracle? That is the liberal international order, multilateral institutions, free trade, right? That was, these are the foundations of the Korean economic prosperity, as well as a flourishing liberal democracy, right? I mean, we have strong commitment and belief in the human rights, freedom, individual freedom, and rule of law. But if you look at what's going on around the world, and especially in the Indo-Pacific region, right? All of these existing rules-based order are crumbling. So we feel acute sense of crisis. So the very foundation of Korean economic development, prosperity, and political development are kind of under crisis. So this leads to the strategic awakening. We are not anymore just staying away from the challenges of the maintaining the existing rules-based order. We need to overcome the passive stance. I mean, we used to be just economic player, right? But we are not anymore just stay, I mean, enough to stay like this. We need to do more. So stepping up to do more, to join forces with the like-minded countries in bolstering the existing rules-based order. And this is also based on the kind of heightened sense of national confidence of the economic development and industrial growth. Yeah, so the vision is what is called global pivotal state. Yeah, so let me briefly go over some of the strategic thinkings behind this Indo-Pacific strategy. Well, of course, this is my personal observation. The first one is that now South Korean government is based on this strategic recognition. As I pointed out before, the rules-based order, the existing international regional order based on rule of law, including the maritime order in South China Sea, is our vital strategic interest. The second one is Korea, South Korea, even with that, is not in a position to pursue openly hostile, antagonistic policy vis-a-vis China. We are too close geopolitically, economically to China. We need to maintain stable relationship with China, right? But that does not mean that we don't have any strategic choices and options. So with this new Indo-Pacific strategy, I think President Yoon wants to set a new bilateral relationship with China based on the principle of reciprocity, mutual respect, and common interest. So this is not the same thing as just kind of anti-China or pro-US, right? So this is a kind of reflection of a Korean government's aspiration to pursue independent, autonomous foreign policy. And the third element of the Seoul's strategic thinking is that the more we forge stronger ties with America, Japan, India, and other like-minded partners, we are in a better position to maintain, to improve the relationship with China. I'm not talking about just the leverage. I mean, the more we have friends and allies, right? This will give us better position to construct, to forge more stable and constructive relationship with China. So our alliance with America and solidarity and cooperation with other like-minded partners is not antithetical with our relationship with China. It's not just a zero-sum relationship. We believe it's a positive-sum relationship. And also, this Indo-Pacific strategy is not just about Japan or US or making a extended deterrence against North Korean nuclear and missile provocation. It's more about South Korean government's aspiration to expand our strategic horizon and geography, not only to Southeast Asia, but South Asia and other parts of the Indo-Pacific region. So then what are some of the key priorities in Korea's maritime strategy? The first one is that we clearly define ourselves as a free trading nation and maritime nation in the Indo-Pacific. Geographically, South Korea is located at the southern end of Korean Peninsula, which is contiguous to the Eurasian continent, right? But geoeconomically, we are an island. We are just an island, maritime nation, right? The only trading route comes from the south and the west. So we are a trading maritime nation. This defines our strategic interest and our the maritime and Indo-Pacific strategy. So fundamentally, President Yoon's Indo-Pacific strategy is maritime strategy. So the priorities in maritime domain constitute the key elements of the President Yoon's Indo-Pacific strategy. Well, I mean, in the past, when we were confused about our strategic orientation, right? We used to be silent about the South China Sea situation, assuming and believing the South China Sea dispute is a matter between the great powers, US and China. So we didn't want to get entangled or entrapped between this great power rivalry, but which is not true, right? I mean, we are a trading nation. Our energy imports, our trade and export and import all comes through these critical sea lanes of communication across the Taiwan Strait, East China Sea, South China Sea, and Indian Ocean. So starting August last year, right? Korean government started to speak out about China's aggressive behavior, water cannon attack on the Filipino ships. So since last August, Korean government issued statement of concern 10 times. So whenever Korean government issued this statement, we start to have some sort of reaction from China. So when the spokesperson of Korean Foreign Ministry issued this statement, then the Lin Zhan or Wang Wenbin, right, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson, made a very strong statement, critical statement. And we have very strong diplomatic démarche. So this kind of, whenever you have incidents in the South China Sea, we issued a statement, then Chinese protest. So this is kind of new normal in our bilateral relationship with China. So the very fact that China reacts is very noticeable, and this is a kind of, so I think that Korea's kind of new policy maneuver on South China Sea is a kind of very making some sort of effect. Yeah, this is one of the statements posted on the embassy Facebook website of the in Manila. Yeah, so this is the title of the newspaper story covering that South Korea finally started to speak out. So I think this will be the kind of the continuous, consistent policy on South China Sea down the road. So then what are some of the South Korean government's priorities in maritime domain? Well, last year, Korean government issued a document called the Action Plan for a Free, Peaceful, and Prosperous Indo-Pacific. So it is uploaded in the website of Korean Foreign Ministry, and it's downloadable. It's written in English. So this document provides the broad overview of South Korean government's stance regarding the maritime domain. Some of the key elements is that, for example, we are willing to increase our participation in combating piracy and the ensuring safety of navigation in South China Sea, in Indian Ocean, and the Gulf of Aden area. And also, the MDA is one of the key priorities, not only in Korean Coast Guard, but Korean Navy. So we are trying to enhance our ability to cooperate in real-time maritime surveillance and information sharing. And also, expansion of the Korean Navy in various joint maritime exercises in the region is also one of the key priority. And also the enhancing the cooperation in enforcing maritime law and combating IUU fishing is another priority. Okay, I'll skip. And yeah, finally, yeah, this is the final page of my presentation. I think there are several areas of potential cooperation and opportunity between South Korea and India. The first one is that, to my knowledge, I think South Korea and India need to explore to establish a new track one level mechanism. I mean the maritime dialogue. I'm not talking about track 1.5 or track 2, but I'm talking about track 1. We've already recently over the years established maritime dialogue with the Philippines as well as the Vietnam, right? So we could establish a similar bilateral maritime dialogue with India. And also, we are interested in establishing what is called ROK Indian Ocean Cooperation Fund. South Korea recently joined the IORA as an observer. So I'd like to explore some of the ways to create some funding sources to provide the Korea's participation in IORA. And also, South Korea has not yet joined IPOI. So we need to explore how South Korea can join some of the pillars of IPOI. So I think that we could consider the science, technology, and academic cooperation pillar, or trade, connectivity, and maritime transport pillar. And also, IUU fishing is definitely the area that we can enhance and strengthen and expand bilateral cooperation. So MDA cooperation, I've already briefly mentioned. Yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. But think about Korea not speaking out yet, and now speaking out. And the K movies, they've taken over the entire Indian Netflix system. I once watched 3 K-Flix movies, Korean movies, and thereafter, every time I open my Netflix, there is a proposal for another Korean movie. So you are very well entrenched into India, so, and you are very popular here. And well, if you speak out more, I think that will be for strategic purposes. And thank you so much for this new dimension that you place, the pivotal state concept, and the idea that it's no more a silent watcher of events, but Korea does now intend to come out and speak. Now, speaking is the first part of doing, so maybe next step is doing something about it. And I mean, notwithstanding what Korea is, I mean, so many of our ships are placed, the orders are placed with Korea. It's one of the biggest ship manufacturing countries in the world. You won't believe even Hyundai doesn't make only cars, it makes ships too. You know, the biggest ship we have in the Geological Survey of India for mining this to explore the seabed is from Hyundai. And I've been on the ship. I actually launched the ship, and it's one of the most technologically advanced ships. So you are already here in India, and we welcome you once again. And thank you so much for your exposition. We have some time for question answers. We have our galaxy of speakers have raised such, each one has raised a new perspective today. And I'm sure there will be several queries, explanations, clarifications that the members of the audience would have. So we can take some questions. So we can start from here. Actually, I don't want to miss out on the back portion, but we'll go up and down.
Thank you very much. And I'm Admiral Jantapela from Sri Lanka. Let me first congratulate all panelists for excellent deliberations. No wonder, all doctors. I don't have a question. Normally, I'm not supposed to ask questions from the moderator, but little clarifications. Since you mentioned International Seabed Authority, now recently I saw in the media it's Cobalt War. There's a huge cobalt mountain in Indian Ocean. It's fancy nicotine, it's called. So now I saw in the papers, India has already claimed and India has already paid money to get the license, and it's close to Sri Lanka. It's about 1,050 kilometers, and then to Maldives and also to India about 1,200. But this is a little bit of geopolitics involved. Now India is also claiming recently Chinese ships in this area. Now Sri Lanka also, we had some issues with that, but now it has stopped visiting to Sri Lanka. But I want to know from you, sir, doctor, this how can seabed authority decide? Now this is now according to the UN conventions, they can design for the best use of the globally for the economy. Now can they decide? How can they decide? One particular country should get or any other means. So that's a clarification I want. It's not a question. Thank you.
The answer is pretty long, but I'll shorten it for the purposes of saving time and for brevity. The International Seabed Authority actually works on regions beyond the economic zone. So that's one thing. So it's in the open waters. There they have two mechanisms. One is to grant the prospecting license, where people have to first collect, or they are allowed to collect information about what exists, and then they contract to mine the product or the seabed mineral. So far, the International Seabed Authority has granted several prospecting licenses all along the Indo-Pacific, but yet not an operation license. So nobody has an operation license. So I was fortunate enough to attend one of the International Seabed Authority meetings a long time back, and there a proposal was prepared actually, which some of us objected also, but there is a system of voting, just like the multilateral institutions. So sometimes you get overwhelmed by that. The area around Zanzibar was claimed by China for prospecting, and they were given the first clearance on that area. And the issue is what I think Ambassador Sibal also mentioned, that Chinese ships using maritime routes are often suspected to be doing underwater prospecting kind of surveillance or collecting information. So with that information, they can swing some of these prospecting licenses. About the cobalt, yes, it's a very rare mineral. We don't have any cobalt in India. We wanted to take over a few mines in Canada, but it's a long process. But here, yes, cobalt is a very rare mineral. And International Seabed Authority has these chunks. So depending on who claims first, who goes there first, and several other geopolitical things, which of course make it very uncertain. They first get the prospecting and then they get the exploitation license. That's the procedure broadly. But I mean, about the Cobalt Mountain, there are a lot of stories going around. Yes, I do share there is, wherever there is, again, I want to cite Ramcharitmanas on this, Gunjat Chancharik Madhuloba. Wherever there is madhu, wherever there is honey, there will be these flies. So that's going to happen in the geopolitical space as far as the seabed mining is concerned. Thank you. I can take one from the back. Yes, please, yes. Please introduce yourself before you ask the question.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Captain Ashish Datta from Indian Navy. I am presently undergoing the Naval Higher Command course at Naval War College, Goa. So my query stems from what Dr. Sumathy covered about the gray zone activities by China in South China Sea. Now, a lot of literature is available on this issue. But ma'am, to my mind, when we call these activities as gray zone, I feel that it gives it a sort of legitimacy that these are outside the rule-based order of the world. But if you see the PCS verdict of 2016, it has already declared that these activities are unlawful. So is there a compelling need to call them gray zone activities, or we can just simply call them unlawful? Because when we call them gray zone, it sort of gives a perspective that this is something which has to be dealt with separately, whereas there are already rules for that. So if I may have some comments on this, sir.
Thank you for the question. Okay. I think when you talk about gray zone, the definition usually, or definition or references are mainly coming from the US reports. And, you know, it's taken up by many researchers or even no statements to say. But what is described as gray zone is it is conducted but unclear law enforcement. Usually Coast Guards, but in some cases it is accompanied by Chinese naval vessels. So how do we attend to it? And in some areas, law enforcement, in the EEZ, the law enforcement or the Coast Guard is the primary responder to any security issues. But in sensitive security areas that I've mentioned earlier, there are also, in some cases, deployment of Air Force, deployment of the Navy to show presence and also to shadow out intrusions and so on. So even in Malaysia's cases, I think the responder is not only the Coast Guard but also the Navy. So this is why, you know, a lot of discussion has come about how do we deal with, you know, different ships, you know, white and, you know, law enforcement ship operating in the EEZ, and their intention is not military activities, for example. It is purely to see who is, you know, what exploration is taking place, to shadow out or accompanying illegal fishing vessels. So I don't have yet a detailed definition as to what is grey ship, but I think this is my understanding of why it is grey. Thank you. Maybe Renato can.
If I may, because we have been, of course, at the receiving end of Chinese gray zone operation. From the perspective of the Philippines, we have done away with the great notion of gray zone, because it is, in a way, it's a creation of the West, but for the Chinese, you know, it doesn't exist. From a perspective, it's simply a coercive action. Of course, the original definition of gray zone, it's beyond the actual use of kinetic force when you have to use ammunition. But what the Chinese is basically doing, like, for example, ramming and blockade are actual acts of war. Ramming is an ancient form of warfare. If you go back to the Peloponnesian War, if you go back to warfares waged by the Romans, it's actually an act of war. So we have moved away from the notion of gray zone. It's seen as coercive, short of the actual use of kinetic force. So it's still seen as, in a way, warfare. Going back, again, I'm quoting actually Professor Holmes in his recent article about there's actually no such thing as gray zone. There's actually act of war using Sun Tzu. China is exposing its will on countries like the Philippines. So it's not gray zone. It's, in a way, a form of warfare. But of course, for political and diplomatic reason, we don't want to use the term that's actual act of war. So in a way, sometimes gray zone could be convenient because you don't cross that threshold. But for if you're in the receiving end, it doesn't simply make any difference. You know, if you see the damages that the Chinese Coast Guard inflicted when they ram our Coast Guard vessels. Okay.
Thank you, Sean Andrews from Senior Maritime Fellow, Australian National University. First, I just want to say thank you to all the speakers, and I think we found our first moment of cooperation where, if I distill 2 points from all of you, is you exposed your strategy. That is, you all desire to maintain access and, in fact, underpin the rule of law. So, bravo. The second part, these are quick-fire questions. I guess one is MDA now code for intelligence sharing? Because I can do MDA on my phone, I don't need to actually go somewhere else. The second part, if we look at the metrics of fish in the Indo-Pacific, if I look at wild fish, it's 54%. If I look at the Indian Oceans, it's 33% of wild tuna stock. In the Pacific Ocean, it's 51%. So therefore, plus coupled with 3.75 million fishing boats in this region of the global 4.4 million, which means that 75% operate here, 20% of the meat protein, Bay of Bengal, 60% of the meat protein. So you've got not only competition of resources, you've got human security and food security. That's also another thing to cooperate. I agree with you all. These are about cooperation, not competition. And then I'll leave it at that. But I think, the other one is, would you agree that we've got to stop saying things like choke points? Because there's only one. These are capacity points. For professional mariners, it's really a time and space problem. And the reason I say that is, once again, the linguistic manipulation raises tension, because if everything's national security, nothing is national security. And once again, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks for adding to the information. Yes.
I'm Vice Admiral Murugesan. So my remarks, what I am going to say now, comes out of Dr. Cho's presentation and subsequent remarks by the Secretary Trivedi. Because Korea is expressing the desire to further enhance the cooperation between India and Korea. And the capacity of shipbuilding, Korea, which has been brought out by a secretary. Why not build in addition to building only the Hyundai cars in India, Japan could come and do shipbuilding with the Indian shipyards. There are several smaller shipyards whose capacity can be enhanced with the cooperation of Korea in India. And then, like you are selling the Hyundai cars in India, and you can build those ships and even build for some other countries. That is just a remark.
Yeah. I got that kind of questions whenever I talk about my Indian colleagues, right? So shipbuilding, semiconductor, why don't you make a deal? But it's very hard to make a deal in shipbuilding and semiconductor, because I think there is a gap in our mutual expectation, which leads to the different expectation about terms of conditions. You mentioned that why Korean shipbuilders make a ship in Indian shipyard? That is not easy. So you are talking about 100% technology transfer, local production, right? Which is not really acceptable from commercial standpoint. So I think what is really necessary is to give us, Korean counterpart also should give you some sort of long-term confidence in making long-term investment. What I see as a challenge is that both Koreans and Indian counterparts have a very transactionally oriented short-term perspective, right? This is not just a one-shot game. You need to take a longer-term perspective, and you need to make investment, not only in economic investment, but in the political and strategic, long-term strategic investment.
Go has a point that there is a difference between this. But yes, there is a scope for transfer of technology on some parts of the ship, making of the keel or any other part of the ship. Some of that is happening. For example, the Cochin shipyard has collaborations with IHC of Netherlands recently, and that's been done after a long deliberation of about 10 years. Now they've come to making dredgers in Cochin shipyard. So that kind of part transfer will perhaps enhance the confidence in the long run, as Dr. Go says. The next question could be, well, let me take one from the back. Okay, sure.
Testing. Testing, can you hear me? Very good. I don't know why I'm volunteering to answer a non-question, but indeed, Sean did ask a question about MDA. And that question on, I think specifically you phrase it as, is MDA code for intelligence sharing, right? That is precisely the type of question that in Southeast Asia we are asking, our extra-regional partners, right? Australia, the US, when the IDMPA was being announced, is it about intelligence or is it about info sharing? And that is precisely the sensitivity behind, the use of the term MDA, capital MDA versus small letter MDA. Why I want to say this is because NMF actually just a few months ago co-hosted two very good workshop series on MDA, one with Australia and one with our friends from the US, right, NISA. And both these workshops, which NMF co-organized, right, explore, right, the evolution of the discussion on MDA. Why is it still important? Is it only between navies? Or, there are other purposes, right? My argument is with the latter, i.e., MDA today is no longer only about info sharing, which you absolutely correct in terms of saying that, you get information out of your mobile phones. Why do you need to, place a liaison officer in an information fusion center somewhere around the world, right? But, let's not forget that, the purpose and the function of some of these mechanisms goes beyond the original intent of just info sharing, right? A lot of it is actually about building relationship with partners and friends. And what better way than to do it face to face, right? And when I say partner and friends, it's not just your conventional partners of, Navy or Coast Guard, right? I give you an example of the Information Fusion Center in Singapore, right? And I believe that the Information Fusion Center here in the IFCIOR has also starting to morph that way, is that when they first started as a Navy to Navy collaborative, effort. Now it includes, the Coast Guard and Maritime Enforcement Agency, and now it includes in a big way, shipping industry. So in that sense, right, the ecosystem has indeed changed. The technology that goes about it has changed. So if we buy your argument that, today when we talk about cooperation, it's not just only about that one item, right? If info sharing, is it only info sharing? If it's resources, is it only resources? But it's climate, it's everything else. The same goes with MDA as well. There is a huge gamut of areas where we can cooperate, where it's not sensitive. Right, but whether or not that cooperation can then lead to, alleviating tension is where I'm struggling with, right? So, in managing the specific, threats and challenges, I think we still have a long way to go, and there are plenty of avenues for cooperation to be talked about. Thank you.
Point well taken. We can get a question from there.
Good afternoon to the panel. I am Captain Chinmay from the Indian Navy, undergoing the Naval Higher Command course at Naval War College, Goa. My question is to Dr. Castro. You brought out very forcefully your concerns about China, about how they're affecting your sovereign claims in the South China Sea. At the same time, China remains your biggest trading partner at $40 billion. You are engaging with them through the RCEP and also through the BRI, where they have invested heavily in your country. So how can you address your sovereign concerns of sovereignty and security without divorcing the issues of trade and infrastructure?
First of all, let me correct you. Yeah, China is a trading partner, but it's not the most important. Basically, it's still Japan. It fluctuates. There's Japan, the United States. What basically you see on the figures, especially during the 6 years of the Duterte administration, was, of course, to merge our trade figures with Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the mainland. So it comes out that China is our largest trading partner. That's the narrative of the Duterte administration. China is not. If you especially remove Taiwan and, of course, Hong Kong, it's still Japan. China's effort to build the BRI initiative simply fell flat. Xi Jinping promised President Duterte, former President Duterte, when he went to Beijing, $24 billion in BRI investment. That's a joke. There are only 2 projects that were implemented. So in a way, we are in a better position to challenge China because we're not part of what you call the Southeast Asian supply chains. A huge portion of our earnings, our wealth, is generated by Filipinos who are working abroad and business processing outsourcing. So that's why we could really afford to tell the Chinese, you can go elsewhere. You can go to hell. You're not our important trading partner, in contrast to other Southeast Asian countries. So in a way, that set us apart. So we could really afford to antagonize China.
Thank you. Thank you. That was, I hope it answers your questions. Doesn't raise any more questions. But can I just request if any of the students on the floor have any questions, and we would welcome. Do you have a mic there? Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
Jai Baba Kedarnath. Myself, Harsh Gupta from Directorate of Treasuries, Dehradun. India's foreign policy revolves around Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. World is a home. And very well explained by the Mr. Castro. My question is from him that India's foreign policy started from the 1992 by the then Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao for the Look East policy towards the 2014 by Prime Minister Narendra Modi Act East policy. Why India is not a member of the ASEAN towards our commitment towards the East Asian countries? And what are the steps taken by the Philippines?
Why is India not part of ASEAN? India is in South Asia. We're in Southeast Asia. And of course, the fact that you have to accept the fact that the Southeast Asian countries are generally middle powers without military capability. If we would invite India, that will be a big problem for us because, India is a great power. It has nuclear weapons. It has, huge army and, of course, an expanding navy. What characterizes basically if you look at the geopolitics of Southeast Asia, we tend to try to equate Southeast Asia just like the Balkans because we don't have any major powers that could push other great powers. So we, in a way, provide opportunities for great powers to come in. And this is where, of course, ASEAN grand strategy plays in. We would like to basically ensure that great powers balance each other in Southeast Asia. That will be more complicated if India will be part of this. What are we doing? We cannot. It's a matter of geography. What we can do, of course, is actively engage India in, we considered India as a very important security partner because of the fact of the BrahMos. Basically gave us, a better chance for, anti-access area denial. So this basically provides us ideas of how we could basically jumpstart the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept because at this point in time, we have an anti-access area denial capability, thank God to the BrahMos. Or we're thinking of acquiring more. So that's basically, we could engage India in terms of, having a greater security role in Southeast Asia. I hope I addressed your question.
Thanks. Mr. Castro, the DRDO says BrahMos in Manila is a secret, right? So I think you mentioned it and the entire world knows that BrahMos is now placed in Manila. I never spoke about it. I was told not to tell anybody. But anyways, you let the secret out. And I think what you say is very correct, that being there, I think there is a very huge strategic advantage that Manila has. But I think it's also a great connect that India has developed with the Philippines. And I think there's more to come in this line. Thank you so much. Admiral Chauhan has a question or a statement.
Thank you. I have a question. First of all, I'm aware that I'm not supposed to ask a question. But the fact that we've got Fifi here, Dr. Muibat, is too much of a temptation to let you go without any questions being asked of you. So my question is directed straight to you, Fifi. See, we are witnessing increasingly frenetic recommendations that Indonesia needs to integrate maritime protection measures into its subsidies that it applies for small-scale fishers. And despite claiming exemption from the 2022 WTO agreement to halt harmful fisheries subsidies, Indonesia nevertheless needs a strategy to support these small-scale fisheries while simultaneously ensuring marine stability. India has exactly the same problem. So my question to you is, what honest advice do you think Jakarta could give policymakers in New Delhi? Thank you.
Wow, tough question. What policy advice? Hardly any, because I don't think we're handling the issues well enough as it is. Yes, like I said, IUU fishing is a big issue for Indonesia. The perpetrators is, of course, not only domestically, but also, foreign fishing vessels coming into our, at least our EEZ. So the management of the issue has been quite a bit of a dilemma, because on the one hand, we want to encourage more fishing. We want to encourage the welfare of the fishermen, but at the same time, we also recognize the overexploitation on most of the our fishing areas. So and so far, we have not yet found the right balance to it just yet. What's also been interesting, and I think this adds to a lot of our problems, is the issue of the reclamation of some of the fishing areas, which creates even further problems for trying to encourage the welfare of the fishermen, and adds to the another problem of these exports of some of the how do you call this, the no. Yeah, so the the exports of the smaller fish, and I think this is adds to a lot of policy issues. Now, our concern is that going forward, maritime issues was largely a big policy for President Joko Widodo, and so far the next president has not made the same amount of statements with regards to maritime issues as Joko Widodo made when he was coming into power. So the concern of a lot of people who were paying attention to maritime issues in Indonesia, that this might not be as much of a priority for the next president as it is now. Of course, we cannot confirm that because the government is not yet in place. We don't know who he's going to appoint as ministers, for example, taking the positions of the important positions with regards to maritime issues. But these concerns exist, and without the right policies in hand, we are very much concerned that we don't really have any clear strategy on how to manage the issue in the future.
There's something which has come on, which at this stage is very difficult. But yes, I do see in this scenario a future where we will have trawlers with nuclear heads. Maybe, we'll have to threaten each other because it's getting so serious. Between India and Sri Lanka, there are so many people caught every year and released it's a huge process that keeps going on and on, because the need for food and the rising populations, as Chairman have said, is going to be a pressure on all resources. Why just maritime? And maybe like the way we have lab-grown burgers or chicken, or we'll probably have lab-grown fishes in future. Who knows? So science might help us grow food in the lab rather than in the oceans. at least then people will leave oceans free from pollution and there'll be beaches to enjoy. Thank you very much. Is there time for a few questions? Yes, sir. Why not? Huh?
Well, thank you very much. My name is Hideshi Tokuchi. I'm from Japan. And, when we discuss regional geopolitics and security partnership, we tend to focus the rivalry between the United States and China, and also, the U.S. alliance relations and AUKUS and the Quad. But where is ASEAN? Today we heard the positions of Malaysia, the Philippines, and Singapore, and Indonesia. But in the past, we discussed, ASEAN-related frameworks like, ASEAN Regional Forum and ADMM and ADM Plus and so on and so on. But where is ASEAN today?
I'll take this first, and then I'll see whether my colleagues can add on to the proper answer, right? In fact, I had the ASEAN component as the last part of my presentation. I cut it out because of time. Main reason is because in my mind, that we have an opportunity now, right? Sensei, you know that ASEAN launched the ASEAN Maritime Outlook last year. Well, we got a lot of negative criticisms about the document itself, but let's not forget that, it's actually a living document where it can be updated every 3 years. So I've been advocating that, this allows ASEAN the opportunity to engage with extra-regional partners, right, to talk about Southeast Asia maritime priorities. Right now, if you look at the document, you can download it from the ASEAN website. It's very nice pictures, all right? But what it means now is that, it distills ASEAN maritime priority into 3 areas. First is maritime safety and security, right? So this is about, all the threats and challenges. Number 2 is actually on economics and and infrastructure. So it's about the living, non-living resources plus critical infrastructure. And then the number 3 is on ocean health, right? So about climate, environment, et cetera, et cetera. So whilst, right now, my understanding is that there's no discussion in terms of, how to make use of this particular document, because it only highlights the existing maritime cooperative mechanisms. But I see a lot of opportunity in terms of, how it can be used. Number 1, to operationalize the maritime component of the broader AOIP, the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. Number 2, it allows for a lot of conversation with partners, interested partners, in looking at specific maritime issues, right? Already, I understand that the ASEAN Secretariat has hosted, joint workshops with some partners. I think Australia, Japan, South Korea, were part of the initial discussion about this. And again, it provides an avenue for that, right? Discussing how do we move forward with some of these issues of interest to partners. I think the one thing that I want to put here is that, whilst if you have read my commentaries, initially I've been arguing that the AMO shouldn't be an ASEAN strategy. I still think that it shouldn't be an ASEAN strategy in managing maritime issues, but what it should be is a strategic document in terms of how ASEAN can collectively more effectively respond to some of our maritime challenges. So the means and how, right? We should have, that kind of, strategic thinking in terms of having a mechanisms. So rather than just these are the priorities, because if you ask me, all 10 ASEAN countries, soon to be 11 countries, will never be able to give you a list of what is the number 1 priority, number 2, number 3. Let's not try to do that. Let's just come up with some mechanisms in terms of how better to address it collectively as a region. So should it be, for example, should it be ASEAN 10 plus 1 on certain issue, or can it be ASEAN minus some? So just only certain countries go ahead with some partners, right? I think these things we can discuss and we can move forward in terms of, bringing together extra-regional partners to it. Thank you.
Too generous with questions. So maybe our caterers are getting impatient. They want to serve us lunch. But I take this opportunity to briefly sum up, if you want, what our galaxy of experts have said. starting from Malaysia, talking about the South China Sea, the green zone tactics from Professor Castro, who spoke about the archipelago defense concept, where it's a way to resist the Chinese aggression, but also to keep a fair dialogue going on. Then we had Singapore talking about the ocean reserves and the rule of law. Well, Singapore is known for its rule of law, so I can't think of any other thing that the Singapore government would talk about in terms of maritime geopolitics other than imposition of rule of law or following the rule of law. We all know about Singapore. You do something and you will be arrested. So the rule of law in Singapore is why everybody is scared, right? And then we came to Ms. Muibat in Indonesia and the diplomatic efforts, the domestic, the loss of diplomatic face, how to handle, I mean, it's kind of trade-off that she was talking about and how to maintain distance yet get close. It's a very difficult situation. Boys and girls, you can understand these situations in those young days, how to keep a distance and yet get close was a big challenge. Well, the Indonesian Professor Ko was, the Korean professor was talked about the flexible maritime strategy and the new Korean diplomacy, the diplomatic pitch, which is not so silent, is actually a very, I think, personally, I think that's the way to go. Rather than tolerate anything, you better speak out. And you have your independence, you have your prosperity. What do you have to fear? I think you're the 10th largest in the world, make the best ships, you're the best, and you make the best movies. I mean, you have, so you have all the authority to say what you want to say. Well, with this, I thank all the speakers from the bottom of my heart for a beautiful session. I thank on behalf of NMF, and I'm sure you've regaled the audience, and we look forward to yet more another year of sessions with you in the IPRD 2025. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Ambassador Kanwal Sibal to kindly come up on stage and present tokens of our gratitude and appreciation to the participants of this session. Dr. Sumathy Perumal. Professor Renato Castro. Ms. Jane Chan. Yes. Dr. Viswapati Trivedi. Dr. Shafia Muhibat. finally, Dr. Wongi Chur. May I also request the participants on stage to step forward in front of their tables for a group photograph thereafter. Thank you, sir. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we have concluded the first session. May I now request everyone on stage to kindly resume their seats in the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, while our intellectual appetite has indeed been sated, it is time to tend to more physical appetites. I am accordingly delighted to inform you that we will now break for lunch. I request everyone here to reassemble at 13:55 sharp. Please do take a look at the navigational video, which would help you reach the venue comfortably. Thank you.